Chapter 635. This is one of the three broken islands of the land of South Morning formed after eastern wastelands crashed into it. The expressionless and arrogant man on the warship lifted his right hand and swung it in the air. Immediately, a jade slip appeared on his palm. The jade slip shone, and an illusory map appeared before the man and the woman beside him. The complete eastern wastelands, along with the South Morning, which had now been turned into an island, as well as their current location, were shown on the map. On the map, they could clearly see three words written on the island in front of them. Freezing Sky Clan. The three great islands of the land of South Morning are the strongest remaining forces in the land of Berserkers. This should be the place where Great Leaf Immortal Sect sent their immortals to descend. But based on the Sect Master's predictions, Great Leaf Immortal Sect has suffered great losses in the land of Berserkers this time. Tion's projection died, and there's no news of the sect elders from Great Leaf Immortal Sect in this place. They must have run into some sort of mishap. Big Brother Biling, you won't run into much resistance here. This trip won't be difficult, the woman said softly as she looked at the protective screen of light not too far away from them. We won't run into much resistance, but it also means that this place might not be the place where the second god of Berserker's left hand is sealed, the man called Biling said languidly, his gaze turning even colder. There's a 3/10 chance that the second god of Berserker's left hand is in this place. We'll need a fortuitous encounter to do so. Besides, compared to Sea Sky Clan's island where Sky Mist Dao's immortals descended, and the third island in the land of South Morning controlled by Hidden Dragon Sect, I think that this place has the highest possibility of being the second god of Berserker's left hand, the woman said softly after a moment of thought. Biling let out a cold harumph. He did not speak, which could be considered as him agreeing to the woman's words. He lifted his right hand and pointed towards Freezing Sky Clan's island, which was getting increasingly closer. Immediately, the Dead Sea roared, and the hundreds of Dead Sea giants right in front opened their mouths wide. As they let out low growls together, a large number of them shot out from the sea. With just a glance, the hundreds of giants were swiftly closing in on Freezing Sky Clan's island through the screen of light. As they drew closer, the waves on the surface of the sea roared. As they rotated, they turned into a whirlpool with the island as its center, and it started spinning with loud, rumbling sounds. Big Brother Biling, you don't have to worry. The person who went to Sea Sky Sect's island in Sky Mist Dao to search for the second god of Berserker's left hand is Seiko. That person might have extraordinary power, but he's arrogant and conceited. The resistance he'll face will definitely be great, and it's still uncertain whether he'll be able to successfully occupy the island. You prodigies will be ranked based on your achievements, and Big Brother Biling should be ranked at the top. The woman looked at Biling, and there was a gentle look on her face. Seekong is nothing to worry about, but the one heading to Hidden Dragon Sect's third island is Chinchong. That person is the greatest enemy I'm concerned about, Biling said calmly. The moment he said Chun Chong's name, a hint of wariness appeared on his face. Seekong, Chinchong, and Eastern Wasteland's evil sex Baisu, and righteous Heaven Dao's Yuan. Biling narrowed his eyes. The last name especially caused his expression to turn dark. Yuan, the lady frowned. Clearly, this name had left an extremely deep impression on her. He is acknowledged by all the immortal sects as the strongest among the disciples of this generation, Yi Wang. He was born with 5 immortals protecting him. The 5 immortals paved the way for him, and he is a person who possesses the fortune of being an immortal. It is said that when he was born, 10 immortals who had originally died were awakened in the world, and they were given by the heavens to protect him for life, the woman said softly after a moment of hesitation. Biling remained silent, but there was a hint of fighting spirit burning in his eyes. He might be looking at the protective screen of light that was being attacked by the hundreds of Oceania giants, but he did not pay too much attention to it. What he truly cared about was the competition between the prodigies from the various sects who had descended to the land of Berserkers. I'll leave this protective screen of light to you, junior sister Chenexine. Bailing closed his eyes and sat down cross-legged at the bow of the warship. The woman by his side nodded lightly and looked at Bailing. This was the person who had always existed in her heart since she was young, and she could give up everything for him. However, Bailing's aloofness had caused her to become dejected time and time again. She sighed softly in her heart and lifted her hand. There was a jade bangle on her wrist, and at that moment, that jade bangle was shining with a gentle light that enveloped her entire body. A hint of that light also spread out and passed through the Dead Sea. Once it connected with the protective screen of light, runic symbols that allowed her to make deductions immediately flashed in her eyes. Time trickled by slowly. On the second day after the warships and the hundreds of Dead Sea giants appeared beyond the protective screen of light, several long arcs charged towards the ninth summit. The people in those long arcs were the people who had left previously. At that moment, their faces were filled with panic. As they charged towards the ninth summit, they brought a shocking piece of news to the people who were still in the ninth summit. A powerful enemy had closed in on the island screen of light and was attempting to break it. The hundreds of oceanic giants, the powerful oceanic aquatic dragons, and the 100,000 feet ship. These pieces of news caused the people of the ninth summit to snap out of their meditations. It was especially so for the Lord of Heaven Gate, the old man in white. With a grim expression on his face, he immediately sent out a few orders. A dozen-something long arcs flew out from the ninth summit, and when they returned that night, Baisu, Huzi, the Lord of Heaven Gate, and the other powerful warriors from the various tribes were all watching an illusory picture before them in silence. What appeared in that picture were the hundreds of oceanic giants and aquatic dragons, along with the terrifying gigantic ship and the black-haired man sitting cross-legged on it. There was also the continuously dimming protective screen of light, as well as the petite figure with her arms spread out beside the man, who had clearly caused the screen of light to lose its effect. Just who could control the living beings in the Dead Sea? Could it be that he's from Eastern Wastelands? Darn it, I don't care who he is. As long as he dares to touch the ninth summit, I'll let him know just how blind I am. Huzi glared at Huzi and roared. By his side, the bald crane cast a disdainful sideways glance at Huzi, wondering how it should escape if the ninth summit was not that person's opponent. Miss Baisu, do you know when Sir Su Ming will wake up? The old man in white hesitated for a moment before he looked towards Baisu. Baisu looked towards the spot where Su Ming was sitting cross-legged, looked at his figure, and shook her head lightly. The moment Baisu shook her head, a muffled boom suddenly traveled forth from the distance. It was impossible to tell where that sound came from, but it came from all directions at the same time. It was as if that sound had come from all directions at the same time. That sound came too suddenly, and almost at the instant it traveled forth in waves. A crack could be seen in the sky. It was as if the sky had been torn apart, but if anyone took a closer look, they would find that the crack was actually an invisible screen of light that covered the entire place. As the booming sounds and cracks appeared, the old man in white's expression changed. Some of the people around him even immediately stood up with incredibly grave expressions on their faces. A gust of wind howled and moaned as it echoed in the area at that moment. There was also a foul stench that did not belong to the frozen sea, but came from the Dead Sea. The protective screen of light had shattered. The strength of the protective screen of light had made Su Ming frown in the past. It could fight against the catastrophe of the Eastern Wastelands, but now it had shattered in just one day. At that moment, all the people in the ninth summit who were awake at that moment felt their hearts tremble, and they gained an estimation of just how strong their enemy was. However, that estimation eventually turned into bitterness. Once the protective screen of light beyond the island shattered and disappeared, blood trickled out of the corners of Qinshin's mouth. Her face was pale and her expression was dull. She staggered a few steps backwards. Big Brother Bailing, I can only break the defense of this place for 3 days. 3 days later, it will reappear. That's why you only have 3 days. Bailing had already stood up by her side. A piercingly cold presence surrounded his body. His gaze was icy cold, and he did not look at Qinshin. Instead, He lifted his right hand and formed a seal before he pointed forward. With it, the hundreds of dead sea giants immediately rushed into the island while roaring. They took huge strides towards where Freezing Sky Clan was. As the Dead Sea rose and fell, it drowned the edges of the island. Aquatic dragons that were tens of thousands of feet long soared into the sky. Their black bodies would occasionally appear in the clouds in the sky, and their roars would also reverberate in the air and spread in all directions. Those were 9 aquatic dragons. At that moment, they tumbled through the clouds and charged towards Freezing Sky Clan. As for Bustling, he stood at the bow of the ship. The ship beneath him sliced through the sea, and the instant it closed in on the island, it rushed out of the sea and charged forward in midair. For a period of time, the world where Freezing Sky Clan's island was located was filled with a grim, murderous aura and roars. Immortal Bustling, I have come with the left hand of the second god of berserkers. All you berserkers, kneel down and worship me. Once you accept the soul search, you may live. If you resist, I will kill you without mercy. His voice reverberated in the air like thunder. As his voice traveled through the air, the people on the 9th summit could also hear it. Almost at the same time Bustling's voice traveled through the air, a great divine sense spread out from his body. That divine sense did not spread through a large area, but was absorbed by the ship beneath Bustling. Then, with the ship as the center, that divine sense spread out swiftly. Once his divine sense was changed by the ship, it became incredibly powerful when it spread out. Almost in an instant, it covered the entire island. Immediately, a picture appeared in the air above the ship before Bustling. That picture was a map of Freezing Sky Clan's island, but it had shrunk down to a much smaller size. It did not matter whether it was the land or the frozen sea at the center. All of them were clear as day. There were also 100-something glowing spots flashing on the illusory map. Each of those glowing spots represented a berserker's life, and the 9th summit on the map had the most white spots. There were also some scattered around the area. As Bustling swung his right hand, dozens of sea giants beneath him immediately spread out, and as if they knew where the white spots were at the edge of the map, they charged forward. Bustling's gaze swept past the 9th summit on the map. His expression was aloof, and there was even a hint of impatience in it. To him, this place was just a barren wasteland. I only reached home when it was almost 12 last night. It was snowing on a road, but I was anxious. My friend is getting married, and many of the authors in the circle are going. It would have been fine if it was a little further away, but it's in Bing City, and I'm about 5 hours away by car. Other people can choose not to go, but I'm the host, so I have to go. When I can't, someone else will. This is a strategy, and I can understand it, but I can only smile wryly. I went home. The road was rough, and it was snowing at night. I'll only say one thing. Last night, I was driving really fast, and I ran into danger. A truck stopped there without its lights on. At that time, my mind was blank. I didn't tell my wife when I went home, but I'm still scared. I'm not saying this to get everyone's sympathy. I just want to tell everyone how anxious I've been for the past few days. You can blame me. You cannot understand me, but I can only listen and smile wryly. What can I do? I'm going to explode today. To be continued. If you like this work, please come Come and vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 636. This was just a part of the trial. In fact, it could even be said that this was just the first step of the trial. Even if this place had been incredibly dazzling in the past, but now it was just a barren land filled with a group of uncivilized people. They could only be the stones that the prodigies of the immortals needed to step on as they grew up. They needed to build their own imperishable tower. It did not matter whether it was the scattered berserkers or the mountains that had gathered together on the surface of the sea. Bustling did not pay any attention to them. The only thing he cared about was whether this place was the place where the second god of berserkers' left hand was sealed. As the dozens of sea giants spread out, the berserkers who had left the 9th summit would face great danger. Even if they could survive the slaughter from the sea giants, it would still be difficult for them to escape Bustling's divine sense. In the end, they would only be killed once they caught the slightest bit of attention. The 9 aquatic dragons in the sky were incredibly quick. The sea giants on the ground roared as they moved forward. The 100,000 feet ship sliced through the sky, and as it charged forward, a sea appeared before them. This sea was not the Dead Sea, but was formed by ice, and at the center of that sea was the 9th summit. The clouds tumbled about as the 9 aquatic dragons moved about. Thunder rumbled in the sky, and the ground trembled under the hundreds of sea giants' footsteps. Even the frozen sea stirred up waves that surged into the sky when the sea giants arrived. A powerful pressure spread out from the 100,000 feet ship in the sky, and wherever that pressure went, the world would lose its color. Most of the berserkers on the 9th summit had terror on their faces and anguish in their hearts. They had just gone through the calamity brought by Heaven Gate and had just managed to survive after much difficulty. But now, they had to face a new life and death crisis. Their gazes would occasionally fall towards the person sitting at the top of the mountain. At that moment, that person had become their only hope. Su Ming was immersed in his epiphany and did not know what was happening around him. In his head, the words "what is life?" had been echoing nonstop for an unknown number of times. Gradually, he seemed to have understood it a little, but it was still not clear. When he wanted to search for it, he felt as if he could not obtain anything. As the pressure from the world closed in on the 9th summit and the seawater roared, the Lord of Heaven Gate, the old man in white, stood up with a wry smile. He was the person with the highest level of cultivation in the place. He looked at the 9th summit. He had no path of retreat. After all, this was still a part of Freezing Sky Clan. If he left, then it would mean that he had completely lost his home. I won't leave. Even if I die, I will die in Freezing Sky Clan. If you want to leave, then leave, of course. Bai Su quietly stood up. She looked at the distant sea and sky. She did not say anything, but the calmness in her eyes revealed her inner thoughts. The people who had chosen to stay in the 9th summit fell silent at that moment. They did not speak. The atmosphere instantly became oppressive. Even Hu Zi was glaring at the sky and clenching his fists. He was the one who would never leave this place. Forget about the fact that this was his home. Just the fact that Su Ming was still meditating at that moment was enough for him to absolutely not allow anyone to harm him, unless that person stepped over his dead body. The atmosphere instantly became oppressive. Even Hu Zi stared at the sky and clenched his fists. He was the one who would not leave this place. This was not his home, but Su Ming was still meditating. He would not allow anyone to harm him, unless that person stepped over his dead body. Hu Zi clenched his fists. He did not bother with the others around him and walked quickly to Su Ming's side. He stood before him, and his strong body that was like a small hill blocked out the sunlight that shone through the clouds. He turned into a shadow that enveloped Su Ming within. The aquatic dragon's roars shook the sky and earth, causing the surface of a sea to tremble and stir up even bigger waves. The hundreds of sea giants were also closing in. Their heavy breathing and low roars shook the hearts of all who heard them. That's Freezing Sky Clan before us. A cold voice came from the 100,000 feet ship behind the sea giant. Right before everyone's eyes, Bustling, who was standing at the bow of the ship, took a step into midair at that moment. In an instant, he stood in the sky and lowered his head to look at the people from the 9th summit coldly. He did not see Su Ming, because Hu Zi's body had completely covered Su Ming as he glared at the sky. The Lord of Heaven Gate, the old man in white, had a grave expression on his face at that moment. With a swing of his arm, he rose into the air. As the 9 aquatic dragons roared in the sky and the hundreds of sea giants roared on the surface of the sea, he looked at Bustling, who was thousands of feet away from him, lowered his back, wrapped his fist in his palm, and bowed to him. This is indeed Freezing Sky Clan. Sir, I wonder. Before he could finish speaking, Bustling's aloof gaze was trained on the old man, and he cut him off. Leave this mountain and stand to the left. Once I'm done with the soul searching, I won't make things difficult for you. There was a tone in Bustling's voice that allowed no refusal, as if they did not agree, then they would have to face death. Once he said those words, Bustling lifted his right hand and positioned 2 of his fingers into the shape of a sword. Instantly, sword aura gushed out from his fingertips. The sword light instantly pierced the eyes, and at the same time, Bustling sliced down at the surface of the sea with his right hand. The instant he sliced down, the entire sea roared. A powerful gust of wind howled and swept in all directions. The surface of the sea trembled, and a gigantic crack appeared on the surface of the sea. That crack was 100-something feet wide and several thousands of feet long. It looked as if a small part of the sea had been cut off, and the crack was so deep that the bottom of the sea could be seen. When all the people saw this, a chill that came from the depths of their hearts instantly rose. The might of that one slash was not something a normal person could withstand. Bustling swept his gaze across the ninth summit and said languidly, "I won't repeat my words again." The entire ninth summit instantly fell silent. After the span of a few breaths, 3 long arcs charged up and left the ninth summit to stand to the left of the spot Bustling had spoken of. With someone taking the lead, the others might have felt humiliated, but before this absolute power, they could not summon up the courage to fight back. They turned into long arcs and flew to the left. In silence, complicated looks appeared on their faces. The Lord of Heaven Gate, the old man in white, looked at the ninth summit quietly. As the crowd left, there were only 3 people left. One of them was Su Ming, the other was Hu Zi, who stood before Su Ming and covered him up, and the last was by Su. The ninth summit is a part of Freezing Sky Clan, and it's also the only part we have right now. I'm the Lord of Heaven Gate. How can I allow you to search my soul, just because you want to? The old man sucked in a deep breath, and a brilliant glint appeared in his eyes. As he lifted his right hand, all his power immediately erupted from his body and turned into a whirlwind that circled around him. He had his dignity. Sima Xian had planted a berserker thread in him, and this was a humiliation in itself. However, Sima Xian was still a member of Freezing Sky Clan, so he could endure it. Yet now, the person before him was incredibly unfamiliar. If he continued to endure it, then he would be letting Freezing Sky Clan down, and letting down his status as the Lord of Heaven Gate. If this was Freezing Sky Clan in the past, we had plenty of powerful warriors, and we wouldn't have allowed anyone to bully us. The old man felt anguished. He might value his life, but compared to his dignity, his life was nothing. Almost the instant his cultivation base erupted, the old man lifted his right hand, and immediately, booming sounds reverberated in the air behind him, and a gigantic statue of the god of berserkers appeared. "You overestimate yourself." As Bustling spoke flatly, the 9 aquatic dragons in the sky roared and charged towards the old man together. Each of the aquatic dragons possessed power equivalent to those in the initial stage of the Berserker Soul Realm, and their bodies were also much stronger than those of a Berserker. As they charged forward, they instantly surrounded the old man in white. Loud booming sounds shook the sky. The old man in white was trapped within the aquatic dragons and could not escape. He could only grit his teeth and execute his divine abilities to fight against the 9 aquatic dragons. More accurately speaking, there were not 9 aquatic dragons, but 10 of them. At some unknown point of time, another aquatic dragon had appeared among them. It was roaring furiously and swimming about, but its eyes were darting about rapidly, as if it was searching for a chance to leave. Bustling did not notice the additional aquatic dragon. Instead, he took a step towards the 9th summit. His pride caused him to be incredibly domineering in his actions. If he wanted to make all the berserkers submit to him, then he had to do so. The only way to make these foreign races tremble from the depths of their souls and feel fear from their bones is to make them submit to me. Once he submitted, he would still search through all the people's memories to see whether there were any clues about this place. Only then would he think of a way to search for the second god of Berserker's left hand. He was used to this sort of submission. This might be the first time he came to the land of Berserkers, but he had already gone through multiple killings and subjugation in the Immortals' planets. This sort of thing could be said to be a walk in the park for him. Qinshin looked at Bustling from the ship. In her memories, Bustling was not like this in the past. It was only recently that he had gradually become arrogant and aloof. There was not a hint of emotion in him. She sighed in her heart, And when her gaze fell on the old man in white who was trapped by the aquatic dragons and was letting out booming sounds, she was suddenly stunned. She cast a few scrutinizing glances at him, then frowned. She noticed that there were 10 aquatic dragons, not 9. Qinshin did not point them out. Instead, she stared at the 10 aquatic dragons, and the light of deduction appeared in her eyes, as if she was searching for just where the additional aquatic dragon was. Bailing took a step forward and stood on the 9th summit. His aloof gaze fell on Bai Su. I don't kill women. When Bailing saw Bai Su, his expression remained aloof, and he turned around to walk towards Huzi. There's still someone behind you. If he's protected by you like this, then I can tell just how loyal you are. I'll give you a dignified death for a loyal person. As Bailing spoke, he increased his speed, and in the blink of an eye, he arrived in front of Huzi. He lifted 2 fingers on his right hand, and the sword finger that had split the surface of the sea just now appeared on his hand once again, and he sliced down towards Huzi. Huzi let out a low growl. When he clenched his right hand into a fist, circles of ripples immediately appeared on his body. As those ripples spread out, they surrounded him, turning into an existence that looked like water. As he lifted his right hand, he hurled a punch towards Bailing. Get out of my way. The 2nd chapter is here. I'll continue writing and beg for monthly votes. To be continued. If you like this work, please come Chidian. Come to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 637. A faint bang rang in the air, and the ripples on the surface of the water before Huzi started flashing viciously. Eventually, it crumbled, and his fist landed on the spot before Bailing, but it was only a foot away from him. It was as if his fist had landed on cotton, and he could not do even the slightest bit of damage. Instead, a sharp sword aura spread through his entire body, causing him to shudder and cough up a mouthful of blood. He took a few steps backwards, and, as he retreated, Su Ming was right behind him. But even if he was injured even more, he still forced himself to avoid the spot where Su Ming was. As expected, you're loyal, but your power is too weak. Bailing averted his gaze from Huzi and looked towards Su Ming, who was sitting cross-legged on the surface of the water. A barely noticeable glint appeared in his eyes. No wonder I didn't notice it earlier. So you're in death isolation. Bailing lifted his right hand and turned his fingers into a palm. As he walked towards Su Ming, he was about to close in on him and land his palm on Su Ming's head. He wanted to search through the memories of the person sitting before him. But the instant his palm was about to land on him, Bai Su turned into a long arc and charged towards him. Huzi was also struggling and roaring as he closed in on Su Ming once again. Bailing let out a cold harumph. That harumph was like thunder, and when it traveled out, it rang in Huzi's ears, causing his footsteps to falter. He coughed up blood once again, but he did not retreat. Instead, he rushed in between Bailing and Su Ming and stood before him once again, using his body to protect his junior brother. He let out an extreme roar, and his eyes turned bloodshot. Bai Su shuddered. As the booming sounds reverberated in the air, blood trickled out of the corners of her mouth. Her vision turned blurry, and when her vision cleared up, she found herself in an endless desert. In the eyes of others, Bailing's cold harumph had instantly caused a dazed expression to appear on Bai Su's face. She stood still on the spot, but Huzi had clearly not fallen into an illusion. Instead, with bloodshot eyes, he rushed towards Bailing once again in a frenzy. "How dare you hurt my junior brother? I'll fight you to the death." Huzi roared and charged towards Bailing without caring about his injuries. Bailing frowned and looked at the man blocking his way. He had originally admired his loyalty, but when he heard the man's words, his expression changed. "So he's your junior brother. That's right. Fine, if you can still stand in front of me after receiving 3 strikes from me, I can forgive the 2 of you for being disrespectful." As Bailing spoke, he lifted his right hand once again and positioned 2 of his fingers into the shape of a sword. He swung it towards Huzi, who was roaring furiously as he charged towards him. As he swung his sword, a piercing sword glare shot up and charged towards Huzi in the form of an arc. As Hu Zi roared, he lifted his right hand and threw a punch at the sword glare. An illusory distortion spread out from his body, causing the space around him to become indistinct. A berserker mark appeared on his face. That berserker mark was a mountain, and that mountain was the 9th summit. The 9th summit is my home, and behind me is my junior brother. As long as I'm here, it doesn't matter whether it's the sky or the earth. No one, no living being can hurt my junior brother. As Hu Zi roared, he hurled his right fist forward and crashed against Biling's sword glare. Loud booming sounds shook the sky at that instant. Biling did not move. In fact, not even his robes fluttered in the air, but Hu Zi, who stood before him, took 3 consecutive steps back. He wanted to take a 4th step, but he could not move back because behind him was his junior brother. He forced himself to a stop and coughed out a huge mouthful of blood. His right hand was a bloody mess, and there was a deep sword gash on his chest. Blood gushed out of it. There was a dull look on his face, but his heart was burning. At that moment, he felt as if he was going to burn everything, all for the sake of protecting his junior brother. Su Ming, even if he died, he would have no regrets. Again, Hu Zi wiped away the blood at the corners of his mouth, but his right hand was already a bloody mess to begin with. When he wiped it away, even more blood flowed out of it. He trembled. He could feel death approaching him, but he did not back down. Death is inevitable. I'll die for my junior brother, and it's worth it. Hu Zi clenched his left hand and slammed it against his chest. More red appeared in his eyes, and a dreamy presence spread out from his body. It fused with his berserker mark, causing Biling to feel as if he was looking at a huge mountain at that moment. You're the second person I respect in my life, Biling said languidly as he looked at Hu Zi. But I'd really like to see just how far you can persevere. Biling lifted his right hand, but this time he did not form a sword with 2 fingers, but with 3 fingers. It looked like a seal, but once he formed it, he pointed towards the incoming Hu Zi. In an instant, an illusory long sword appeared before Biling. Once that sword appeared, it let out a piercing sword whistle and charged towards Hu Zi. The man and the sword crashed into each other in an instant. Hu Zi let out a muffled groan. The illusory 9th summit that appeared before him distorted and shattered. The dreamy presence spreading out from his body also dissipated. His left hand shattered with a bang. As he coughed up blood, his body swayed. His face turned pale, but he managed to stop his falling body. Blood trickled down the corners of his mouth. His eyes were bloodshot, and his breathing gradually became sparse. The sword continued floating in midair, but it had shattered and no longer had the shape of a sword. I still have one last slash. I can tell you that I only used 2/10 of my power before this. Now, I will use 8/10 of my power to show my respect to you. Tell me, what is your name? You have the right to make me ask you this question. Biling lifted his right hand, and this time he used his palm as a sword. A sword glare spread out from Biling's right hand. That sword was 7 feet long, and it did not look like an illusion. It looked incredibly real. I'm your grandpa. Hu Zi laughed viciously in a weak manner. He seized the air in his bloodied right hand, and a pot of wine appeared in his hand. It had been a long time since he drank, but at that moment, as death approached him, he brought the pot of wine to his lips and took a big swig. Biling frowned and swung his right hand towards Hu Zi. Immediately, the illusory longsword in his hand flew up, and with a shocking sharpness, it tore through the air and formed a dimensional crack that charged towards Hu Zi. Hu Zi's expression was calm. He stood there with determination and protected Su Ming behind him. He closed his eyes, but there was a ball of fire burning within his body at that moment. He was burning his own life, using his own life to resist this sword, to protect his junior brother. Youngest junior brother, farewell. As the sword closed in on him with a howl, invisible flames appeared on Hu Zi's body. At that instant, suddenly, a palm pressed down on his back. Once that palm touched him, an abundant amount of life force surged into Hu Zi's body like a torrent, extinguishing the flames in his body and replenishing the life force that had dissipated. The injuries in his body also healed slightly. All of this happened in an instant. While Hu Zi was stunned, and the longsword closed in on him, Su Ming, who had been sitting and meditating behind him, stood up with a dark expression on his face. He took a step forward and switched places with Hu Zi, then lifted his right hand and pointed towards the incoming longsword. All of this might have seemed to have happened over a long period of time, but in truth, from the moment Su Ming woke up to the moment he pointed forward, only an instant had passed. That finger touched the longsword, and at that instant, an indescribably loud bang erupted forth. Under that bang, Bailing was forced back for the first time, and he took a dozen-something steps back in succession. With each step he took, a deep footprint would be left on the ground, and it even caused a mountain to tremble. When he took the final step back, he coughed out a huge mouthful of blood with a pale face. He lifted his head swiftly, and shock filled his face. Su Ming did not move back. He stood where he was. Behind him was Hu Zi, his senior brother, the senior brother who had used his life to protect him and protect him just now. This senior brother of his might liked to smile foolishly, might think that he was very smart, and might be so silly that it made others feel rather helpless against him. But he was his senior brother, and he was a man who would use everything to protect his junior brother. This was Hu Zi, Su Ming's third senior brother. Senior brother, I'm here. Su Ming did not look at Bailing. He looked at Hu Zi, and when he spoke softly, he pressed his left hand against his chest. Immediately, a vast amount of life force surged into Hu Zi's body once again. Hu Zi looked at Su Ming with a silly grin on his face. That honest expression made Su Ming's heart ache for him, because at that moment, the injuries on Hu Zi's chest were incredibly severe. His hands were a mess, and his pale face, silly grin, and figure that was like a mountain were things that Su Ming would never forget for the rest of his life. Youngest junior brother, am I going to die? If I die, then so be it. I'm not afraid. You have to remember to look for Master. Hu Zi found it a little difficult to breathe, and his voice came intermittently. You won't die. Su Ming's words were firm and resolute. At that moment, Bailing, who had taken a dozen-something steps back, glared at Su Ming. His expression was incredibly grave, and when he lifted his right hand, a large amount of sword shadows appeared around him. By the looks of it, there were nearly 100 of them. As he pointed forward with his right hand, those sword shadows tore through the air and charged towards Su Ming in the span of a breath. You definitely won't die. If anyone dares to take your life, then I, Su Ming, will destroy their sect, destroy their clan, and destroy their bloodline, even if I have to go to the ends of the earth. Su Ming enunciated each word clearly. When he lifted his left hand from Hu Zi's chest, a blue light shone in his eyes, and he formed a strange seal. That seal looked like the word life. You won't die, because I will usurp life for you. Su Ming swiftly pressed his left hand against the center of Hu Zi's brows. At the same time, he lifted his right hand and pushed towards the approaching 100 sword shadows through the air. With it, a power that could reverse time erupted from Su Ming's right hand. When I say I'll come back, I'll erupt with power. This is the third chapter, and there's still a fourth chapter to come. In fact, if I'm allowed to, there'll even be a fifth chapter. I'll use all my strength to write. I prepared quite a lot of Red Bull that I haven't used for a long time, and I've already smoked 2 packs of cigarettes. I'm going to risk it all. To be continued. If you like this work, please come Chidian. Come and vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 638. At the instant the power of time reversal erupted forth, the near 100 sword shadows behind Su Ming froze at the same time and fell back swiftly. Bailing's pupil shrank. Almost the instant the sword shadows fell back and he was forced back against his will, he bit the tip of his tongue and coughed up a mouthful of blood. Once that blood appeared, it turned into a blood-red chain that circled around him, turning into a vortex formed by the chains. The vortex crashed into the invisible power that reversed time, and a violent bang rang in the air. The chains shattered, the hundreds of sword shadows all disappeared, and Bailing took 2 steps back, but he still managed to force his way out from the reversal of time. At the instant he did so, Su Ming lifted his left hand from the center of Hu Zi's brows and turned around. For the first time, he looked straight at Bailing. Behind him, Hu Zi closed his eyes and fell asleep. His chest rose and fell, but his life force was still around. A mark that looked like the word life appeared at the center of his brows. That mark shone, and it seemed to be at the same frequency as Hu Zi's breathing. Su Ming looked at Bailing, and a complicated look was hidden in his eyes. In truth, when he woke up just now, he saw this person who had once existed in his memories. He looked exactly the same. If there was any difference, then the Bailing in Su Ming's memories was young. Right then, there was an air of age about him. He might not have been ancient, but there was an extreme arrogance and coldness about him. If Su Ming had been his place many years ago, he would have definitely been incredibly excited when he saw Bailing. But now, after experiencing the similarities between Bai Su and Bai Ling, after experiencing Sima and the corpse on the altar in the galaxy, and after learning about many secrets, Su Ming was no longer excited. There was only a complicated feeling in his heart. Bailing did not know him. Su Ming had expected this a long time ago. He looked at Bailing, and the other looked at him. At the instant their gazes met, Bailing's heart trembled. He suddenly had a feeling that while the person before him was unfamiliar, his gaze gave him an incredibly familiar feeling. This sense of familiarity stunned him for a moment. Bailing, long time no see, Su Ming said calmly. A glint appeared in Bailing's eyes, and he stared at Su Ming. You've seen me before? The bay in your name is the bay in the north, and the ling in your name is the ling in the ice, right? Su Ming could not be irresponsible, and he asked languidly. Ling, as in Shan Ling. Bailing said coldly. At that moment, the ship in the distance was closing in slowly. The woman standing at the bow of the ship was staring into Su Ming's eyes with a dumbfounded expression. Gradually, disbelief appeared on her face, and her breathing quickened. You too, Chen Xin. It's been a long time. Su Ming looked past Bailing and at the woman before he spoke softly. You are. Chen Xin widened her eyes and looked at Su Ming. Bailing saw the disbelief in her eyes, causing him to look into Su Ming's eyes swiftly. Who I am is not important. Bailing, let's fight. A brilliant light shone in Su Ming's eyes, hiding the complicated look in his eyes. When he looked towards Bailing, he lifted his right hand and swung it to the side. This battle is not for myself, but for you, who injure my senior brother. Bailing fell silent. A freezing glare shone in his eyes, and with a solemn expression on his face, he lifted his right hand and seized the air behind his head. He looked as if he was seizing the air, but in truth he seemed to have seized something that no one else could see. It was as if he was slowly pulling out a sword from his back. As a freezing glare shone in his eyes, he lifted his right foot and took a step towards Su Ming. At the instant he took that step, anxiety appeared on Chen Xin's face. She immediately flew out, and her voice echoed in the air. Bailing, shut up. Bailing did not turn his head back. He let out a low growl and cut off Chen Xin's words. He traveled so quickly that he was less than 100 feet away from Su Ming. A red glare suddenly appeared in his right hand, and when Bailing let go of his hand, a long red sword turned into a long arc that looked like a burning shooting star and charged towards Su Ming. At the same time, Bailing formed a seal with his hands and pointed towards the sky. Immediately, the clouds in the sky tumbled about, and the aquatic dragons trapping the old man in white roared simultaneously. They left the old man's side and charged towards Bailing, and a python robe appeared above his head. That python robe danced in the air, as if there was an invisible person wearing it, and with a swing of his arm, it charged towards Su Ming. If that was all, then it would not be enough to show just how powerful Bailing was. He pressed his left hand against the ground, and immediately the seawater beneath him tumbled about and turned into a gigantic face. That face was the exact same as Bailing's. That face was completely formed by seawater, and at that moment, it opened its mouth wide and shot up from the bottom of the sea to charge towards Su Ming. Su Ming looked at the incoming sword slash. Behind him was Hu Zi, and behind the divine ability was Dark Mountain's companion in his memories. He would never forget Dark Mountain's memories, and neither would he forget Hu Zi's loyalty. I don't know you anything, Su Ming mumbled. In the face of the incoming sword, he closed his eyes. The instant he did so, the red sword glare closed in on him and stabbed into his chest, right where his heart was. That sword was filled with killing intent, and it was a sword that wanted to kill Su Ming. A loud bang spread through the area, and Su Ming took a step back. The long rainbow sword had only managed to pierce a small part of his chest before it could no longer pierce through. It was as if Su Ming's body had become incredibly strong at that moment, and just that sword alone could not pierce through it. This sword will repay the kindness of passing down the arrow to me in the past. Su Ming opened his eyes and lifted his right hand to press against the sword in his chest. Once he held it, he squeezed it forcefully, and golden light shone from his entire body. That golden light spread out from every inch of his flesh and every single bone, causing a cracking sound to ring out, and the red sword shattered inch by inch in Su Ming's hand, turning into shards that scattered into the sea. Almost at the same time, Su Ming destroyed the sword. The invisible person who seemed to be dressed in a python's robe closed in on him. As he swung his arm, the shadows of 9 aquatic dragons manifested. They opened their mouths wide in Su Ming's direction, and at the instant they swallowed him, they wrapped themselves around his body. With a swift squeeze, a great force that wanted to tear Su Ming apart spread out from them. Su Ming did not move, but no matter how the 9 aquatic dragons roared, they only made Su Ming's face turn slightly pale. His body remained standing straight on the spot, and he was not torn apart. This strike severed our childhood friendship. Su Ming lowered his head and said softly. At the instant he said those words, the golden light that had disappeared from his body erupted forth. Wherever the golden light went, Su Ming would lift his hand, and shrill roars would tumble out of the 9 aquatic dragons' mouths. Banging sounds reverberated in the air, and the 9 aquatic dragons shattered. As they tumbled backwards, they turned into pieces of cloth that resembled a python's robe. Su Ming's words fell into Biling's ears, but not a single hint of change could be detected on his face. Instead, it became even more aloof. He executed his third divine ability, the gigantic face formed by the seawater, and closed in on Su Ming. With a bang, it completely enveloped Su Ming and the 9th summit. If anyone looked from the distance, they would not be able to see the 9th summit. The only thing they could see was a gigantic head that was several tens of thousands of feet tall. It stood tall on the surface of the sea, and within it was the 9th summit. The seawater has buried our memories of Dark Mountain. Beiling, from now on, you are Biling. I, Su Ming, do not owe you anything. I did not owe you anything in the past, and I still do not owe you anything now. You injure my senior brother, and now we will settle our scores. At the instant Su Ming's voice traveled out from the pillar of seawater, a loud bang that shook the sky and earth rose up. Violent ripples spread out from within the pillar of seawater. As they spread out, the pearl crumbled, and the seawater formed a ring that shot out in all directions as if it was a wave of impact. At the same time, as the seawater shot out and the 9th summit revealed itself, an afterimage charged out and closed in on Biling in an instant. At the instant he pointed towards Biling, the presence of life cultivation swiftly surrounded the tip of that finger. The presence of life cultivation was a power that could shake souls and shatter life matrices. Life cultivation was powerful precisely because it could shake other people's life matrices, change one's own fate, overturn the universe, and overturn all the lives in this world. Su Ming had previously possessed a hint of life cultivation's presence, but that presence had become dull due to his bewilderment, chaotic due to his hesitation. Even so, it was still incredibly shocking. Yet now, once Su Ming woke up and was in a state of epiphany, he might not have obtained the complete answer, but he had gained an epiphany in his heart. He might not be able to put that epiphany into words, but he could sense its existence. That was the understanding of the word life. It was precisely because of this that the presence of life cultivation spreading out from Su Ming's body at that moment caused Biling's expression to change. It caused a rare look of shock to appear on his icy cold face. He could clearly feel his soul trembling under that one finger. This one finger is your punishment for stepping into the ninth summit. In his haste, Bustling did not have the time to hesitate. He swiftly retreated, and when he lifted his right hand, all the pores on his body opened up. Waves of sword aura erupted from his pores and swiftly fought back against Su Ming's incoming finger. A loud bang that surged into the sky reverberated in the air. Bustling coughed up a mouthful of blood and staggered several hundreds of feet backwards. Intense pain shot through his entire body, and a large amount of sword aura he had spread out shattered one after another under Su Ming's one finger. A fine cut appeared on the pad of Su Ming's finger, and blood flowed out from it, but he did not stop moving. He took huge strides towards Bustling. When he closed in, Su Ming swung his arm, clenched his right hand into a fist, and hurled a punch towards Bustling through the air. The golden light on Su Ming's entire body seemed to have gathered on his fist, and from the distance, Su Ming's right fist looked as if it had turned into a golden sun. When it illuminated the entire area, Su Ming threw a punch towards Bustling. Bustling did not even have time to wipe off the blood. His pride caused him to be unable to accept this sort of defeat, especially by Su Ming's hands. This caused him to lift his right hand and press his palm against the top of his skull. With it, his entire body started trembling, and right before his eyes, a sword appeared within his body. That sword was only the size of a palm in his body, and as Bustling struck the top of his skull, that sword flew out swiftly. I'm here for the 4th update. I'm begging for monthly votes. I'm begging for recommendation votes. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian. Come to cast recommendation votes and monthly votes. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 639. The instant it flew out, the sword aura that surged through the sky and earth reverberated in the air. With a single point of Bustling's finger, the sword shone with a black and white light and charged towards Su Ming with a howl. This punch is your punishment for hurting my senior brother. Su Ming's fist crashed into the small sword. Booming sounds reverberated in the air, and a wave of impact swept through the area. Bustling coughed up blood once again and took a few steps back. As his face turned pale, he saw Su Ming standing where he was and not retreating. Instead, he unclenched his fist and very casually grabbed the small black and white sword. Bustling, your strongest weapon isn't your sword, it's your bow. You can't use a sword like this. Su Ming grabbed the small sword, and with a flick of his wrist, his divine sense rose swiftly and fused with his powerful will before he sent it straight into the small sword. A shrill sword whistle came from within, as if it wanted to fight back and was calling out to its master. However, that sword whistle did not last for more than 10 breaths before it came to a screeching halt. As Su Ming swung the sword, it grew to a length of 3 feet. He held it in his hand, and in his head, Hong Luo's legacy and his understanding towards the sword, which was related to the royal bloodline of the immortals. This was a different way of using swords. However, Hong Luo did not use swords. That was why he did not practice it. Su Ming had also tried using his Virescent sword before, but the small Virescent sword could not withstand this strange form of control. At that moment, with Bustling's sword in his hand, Su Ming took a step forward and closed in on Bustling in an instant. He swung the sword in his hand and sliced forward. Bustling continued retreating. At that moment, his eyes sparkled, and he lifted his right hand to form a few seals. His left hand clenched towards the afterimages of those seals, and he let out a low growl. Shattering seal explosion. As he spoke and Bustling unclenched his left hand, a series of loud booming sounds immediately appeared out of nowhere between him and the incoming Su Ming. It was as if muffled thunder had exploded in the air, turning into a wave of impact that charged towards Su Ming. Su Ming's expression was calm. At the instant the impact closed in on him, he lifted his left hand and flicked the sword. With it, the sword trembled viciously and let out a piercing hum. That hum was piercing, and with a wave of sound, it fought against the impact from the booming sound. The space between the two of them instantly shattered and crumbled, forming a void that absorbed everything. At the same time, Su Ming bit the tip of his left finger, and when blood flowed out, he smeared it on the blade of the sword. Immediately, the murderous aura of blood rose from the sword. Su Ming held it in his hand, and with a distance of several hundreds of feet between them, he swung it in Biling's direction. With it, a hum rang out, and a ray of red light shot out from his sword. It struck Biling's body and pulled him out. When he coughed up blood, Su Ming shook his head and let go of the sword in his hand. A fine crack appeared on the blade of the sword. According to the legacy Su Ming had obtained from Hong Luo, there were very few swords in the world that could withstand the extreme resonance of that one flick and the softness of the whip. Even Biling's sword had cracks on it. If it had been Su Ming's small Virescent sword, then perhaps just that one full-powered flick would have been enough to make it explode. Besides, according to the legacy Hong Luo had given him, this art had to be used together with the 9 transformations and 10 transfigurations lightning uniformity, and it would be incredibly terrifying. Once Su Ming let go of Biling's sword, he took a step forward, lifted his right foot, and stomped down swiftly. With that one step, the world rumbled, and the clouds above him tumbled about. The shadow of a gigantic footprint gathered together, and with an incredibly shocking presence, it charged towards Biling. A loud bang rang in the air, and Su Ming lifted his foot once again. Once he took 7 consecutive steps, the clouds in the sky started tumbling about furiously. Booming sounds continued without end, and Biling coughed up blood once again. As he fell backwards, his hair was a mess, and he cut a sorry figure. There was no longer any icy coldness on his face, only disbelief and shock. When Su Ming took those 7 steps, he appeared right before Biling and lifted his right hand to strike the man's right arm. Cracking sounds reverberated in the air, and Biling's right arm, which was already heavily injured to begin with, was now a bloody mess. Su Ming did not stop there. He tapped Biling's left arm with a finger, and as his left arm shattered, blood spilled into the air. At that moment, there was a deep gash on Biling's chest. His arms were a mess, and his injuries looked the same as Huzi's. Su Ming lifted his right hand, and as Biling staggered backwards, he grabbed the man's neck. He looked at this person quietly, and a complicated look appeared on his face once again. Su Ming. An anxious cry traveled into the air. It was Qinshin. She had rushed over regardless of everything, and when she saw Biling in Su Ming's palm, tears fell from her eyes. Biling, too, looked at Su Ming, and a broken smile appeared on his face. Su Ming. Su Ming looked at Biling. This was the first time he heard his name come out of Biling's mouth, ever since he woke up. So you still remember me, Su Ming said softly. Su Ming, we bear no ill will. I didn't know you were here. Tears fell from Qinshin's eyes. As she looked at Su Ming, her heart ached. The 2 men before her had left a deep impression on her, and she could not forget either of them. We're different from the others. How could we forget you? Qinshin looked at Su Ming. She had originally thought that she would not run into Su Ming so soon in the world of berserkers. She had also thought about all the things that would happen once she ran into him, but she did not expect that they would run into each other in this manner. You came from the land of immortals. Tell me, what is Dark Mountain? Su Ming asked softly as he looked at Biling and Qinshin. Did Wu La not die? Does Bai Ling still exist? Is Lei Chen well? Where did the elder come from? Yi Wang, Chen Chong, Wu Sun, all the people I met in Dark Mountain. Will they appear in my world one after another? Is the world in Dark Mountain real or fake? Su Ming mumbled. Do you really want to know? The one who answered Su Ming was not Qinshin, but Biling. He looked at Su Ming with a complicated expression and spoke hoarsely with great difficulty. Su Ming fell silent. Anguish and loneliness appeared on his face, and he slowly released his grip on Biling's neck. I already know the answer. You can go. Su Ming turned around and no longer looked at Biling and Qinshin. He walked quietly towards the 9th summit. Behind him, Biling's expression became even more complicated. By his side, Qinshin was crying. As she looked at Su Ming's back, there was pity in her eyes. Su Ming, we are us, but we are also not us, Biling said softly, then turned around and took a step forward, charging towards the ship. Qinshin looked at Su Ming, then closed her eyes and left with him. The two of them stepped on the ship and turned into a long arc that charged forward, gradually leaving into the distance. Only the sea giants around the sea continued roaring. The answer is fake, Su Ming said softly as he stood on the ninth summit. The sea breeze lifted his hair and covered his eyes. I've written 14,000 words since noon. I've finished writing 8 cans of Red Bull and 3 boxes of cigarettes. Who would still dare say that I didn't continue writing? Who would still go against their conscience and say that I've been accumulating chapters for an explosive period of time? To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian. Come and vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 640. It doesn't matter whether it's real or fake. Is it important? Su Ming looked at the sea and sky in the distance and mumbled softly to himself. Was it important? How could it not be important? That was his most beautiful memory. That was his dark mountain. That was a yellowed scroll that was lifted by a breeze that he did not understand. It's not important. Su Ming closed his eyes. After a long while, when he opened them again, he felt slightly tired. This fatigue did not come from his body, but from his soul. It was as if he had buried an entire city and blown out all the lights. What he touched was not darkness, but unfamiliarity that he could not see. There was also a setting sun whose face he did not know, and a dozen years of his childhood. Memories from the moment he left Wushan emerged in his mind. In the end, they turned into a huge ball of string that no one could see through, touch, or sort out. That fatigue sprouted in Su Ming's heart. As time passed by, that fatigue grew stronger, and when it occupied his entire being, it turned into a desolate look of loneliness on his face. Wind blew against the surface of the sea, and as the waves sparkled, it reflected the gradually darkening clouds in the sky. That was the setting sun beyond the clouds. As Su Ming looked at the setting sun through the clouds, he felt as if he was hugging a raft called loneliness tightly, but he could not swim out of the sea of his memories. He could not learn to let go. He stood there. His hair was lifted by the wind, and it looked as if it was dancing in the air. The wind that blew through the gaps between his hair brought with it a sound that turned into the saddest symphony in his life. When Biling and Qinshin left, Su woke up from the illusion. At the instant her world became clear, she saw Su Ming looking at the sea and sky. It was quiet all around her. The Lord of Heaven Gate, the old man in white, and the people who had chosen to stand to the left were all silent. The fatigue in Su Ming's heart was like a soft song. As the song spread out, it caused all those who heard it to be immersed in silence. They did not want to let out a single sound, and neither did they want to interrupt the song. However, he wondered who the ending of this song about Dark Mountain was given to. It had been a long time since Su Ming shed tears. At that moment, tears gradually fell from his eyes, but he did not know that they were falling. It was as if he had already forgotten about their existence. The color of those tears was transparent, but when they fell on Su Ming's cheeks, they seemed to be tainted by his loneliness, causing them to turn into bitter tears when they fell on the corners of his lips. Perhaps everyone's tears were tasteless when they fell. They were just like rain that had just been born. As they grew older, the color of their cheeks would gradually change and turn into bitterness. Su had arrived beside Su Ming at some point in time. Her face was slightly pale. She looked at him and lifted her hand gently, then used Su Ming's tears to dye her fingers. "Thank you," Su Ming said softly. The warmth from the fingertips touching his face made him open his eyes. The light from the setting sun shone through the clouds, giving it a slightly crimson hue. When it shone on the surface of the sea, it looked as if it was tainted with fresh blood. This scene was incredibly beautiful. The tall and slender Su Ming, the beautiful Su, the hair that was lifted by the wind, and the heads of the giants popped up around them. However, the sea giant's roars shattered this beautiful scene and scattered this silent atmosphere. The low growls did not disappear because of Biling's departure. Almost at the instant the sea giants roared, Su Ming lifted his hand and seized the air gently in the direction of the sky. With it, he did not move the sky, but the sea. It rotated with a bang and turned into an incomparably huge whirlpool. It rotated with loud rumbles, causing the sea giants in it to struggle, and even their roars were drowned out by the sound of the waves. Gradually, great respect appeared in the people's gazes as they looked at Su Ming, along with a hint of fear, because the whirlpool on the surface of the sea was spinning faster. Eventually, under that extreme speed, the wind that was stirred up and the water that was stirred up turned into a blade that could cut through flesh and tear bones. Shrill screams rang out as they struggled to escape. However, under the rotation of the vortex, they were of no use at all. All they could do was turn into a pool of blood and flesh that was separated from the bones. When there were no longer any complete sea giants left on the surface of the sea, only a sea of broken bones remained, and Su Ming slowly clenched his right fist. At the instant he did so, drops of blood floated up from the rotating sea. As they gathered together, they gathered into a gigantic ball of blood before Su Ming. Once the ball of blood appeared, the seawater returned to its original color. The souls of nearly 100 dead sea giants flashed in the ball of blood floating in front of Su Ming. Occasionally, they would let out shrill wails that could only be heard with Su Ming's heart. The ball of blood looked as if it was boiling. As it continued gathering together and shrinking, it slowly shrank until it turned into an enchanting red that was the size of a fingernail and floated toward Su Ming. Su Ming lifted his head swiftly. The loneliness in his eyes and expression was buried at the bottom of his heart. What appeared before him was his usual calmness. He lifted his right hand swiftly, and at the same time he swiped his index finger across that drop of blood. He looked as if he had hooked it. It was as if his fingertip had turned into a brush that was drawing lines in midair. One stroke, another stroke, another stroke. Su Ming did not know how many strokes he had drawn, but a complicated runic symbol appeared before him. That runic symbol shone with a blood-red light, and it also exuded an overflowing life force. It was the gathering of all the sea giants' lives. Usurp life. That one word could represent everything. Su Ming did not know how to change lives, but while he was trying to gain an epiphany from the black log, he had woken up on the way and had yet to fully understand it. However, he had managed to come into contact with a path he had not known in the past. Life. Everyone had a different life. That was the pattern of life force. It was the most brilliant light in a living being's body. Not everyone could see that light, but if it was extinguished, then all lives would be destroyed. If it was changed, then their fates would undergo a drastic change. This was numerology. Hu Zi's smiling face appeared in his head. Hu Zi's simple and honest face appeared in his head, along with the person who stood before him in the end and protected him like a mountain. I might have some understanding of life, but I still don't know what life is. I won't change numerology, and neither will I resurrect the dead. But since my blood and hair can give C my X-Science puppet life force and my life is so strange and in-death region, then I can use my life force and my blood as a guide. With my life, I can help my senior brother recover. Su Ming mumbled in his heart. He had drawn that runic symbol, and it was the only thing that had appeared in his head right before he woke up while he was trying to gain an epiphany from the black log. Su Ming had obtained that runic symbol through his epiphany. The moment it appeared, he had a vague sense of familiarity towards it, and that familiarity made him feel as if the runic symbol was him. This was the mark formed by his numerology. Su Ming could sense that the runic symbol was incomplete, but even so, it still contained his life. As the runic symbol was drawn, the clouds in the sky suddenly stopped moving, as if they had come to a standstill. There were no longer any waves on the surface of the sea, as if they had gained life and did not dare to show themselves at that moment. An incredibly powerful presence of life, cultivation, spread out from Su Ming's body at that moment. That presence spread out in all directions, and at the instant it charged into the clouds, the thick layer of clouds in the sky became fainter. Gradually, they became much thinner, causing the light from the setting sun to shine through the clouds where Su Ming sat. The light from the setting sun was even stronger than the light from the area around him. Bai Su stared at Su Ming in a daze. In her eyes, Su Ming's hair gradually gained an ancient air. That ancient color was gray, white, and a boundless expanse of snow. One stroke at a time. When Su Ming finished drawing the final stroke, he bit the tip of his tongue and coughed up a mouthful of blood. That blood fell on the blood-red runic symbol, causing it to instantly gain intelligence and let out a piercing light. When Su Ming lifted his right hand, the runic symbol hooked him and took a step towards Hu Zi, who was lying on the ground. When his foot landed, Su Ming was already standing in front of Hu Zi, with the blood-red runic symbol on his right index finger. Along with Su Ming's own life, he tapped the center of Hu Zi's brows. At the instant his finger touched the center of Hu Zi's brows, quite a number of his hair turned white at a speed visible to the naked eye. Hu Zi shuddered. That runic symbol was swiftly branded at the center of his brows. As it shone, it looked as if it had been branded on Hu Zi's body and soul. A hint of blood shone at the center of Hu Zi's brows and covered his entire body. When that blood spread to his chest, the hideous tear on his chest was wiped away. As that blood spread through his entire body, Hu Zi's arms, which had been a bloody mess, returned to normal. Snoring came from Hu Zi's mouth. That sound was like thunder, and it shook the sky and earth. Hu Zi's life force had not come to an end, but he had suffered a grievous injury that was difficult to heal. He had lost all of his life force. This sort of recovery was much simpler than stealing the life force of the heavens, but it was still not something a normal person could do. Only those who practice life cultivation could make someone with such injuries return to normal. Su Ming did not have the ability to change Hu Zi's principles of life, but he could use his own principles of life to nourish Hu Zi and wake him up. However, Su Ming had yet to truly step into the path of life cultivation. He was only lingering at the threshold. Because of that, he would have to pay an incredibly great price for healing Hu Zi's injuries. Yet no matter how great the price was, Su Ming would not hesitate, because this was Hu Zi. This was his third senior brother. Once he heard Hu Zi snoring, a smile appeared on Su Ming's pale face. At that moment, the clouds in the sky were continuously thinning. An array of golden red light shone down through the cracks between the thinning clouds. It landed on Su Ming's body and his hair. It was a mixture of black and white. It was an ancient air that looked like it was gray, but was not gray. It was the light of a candle in the clouds, and it was the sorrow of being homeless or unable to find his home. If you like this work, please come and vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 641. Su Ming left. He brought away the bald crane, who had turned back into an aquatic dragon, and when Hu Zi was safe and in deep sleep, he chose to leave. Parting was a form of longing, and longing was not just something that came from a man and a woman. Most of the time, it was also something that came from the friendship between brothers. The ninth summit stood tall on the surface of the sea. A presence that belonged to life cultivation filled the top of the mountain, and it was on a gigantic stone monument. That stone monument was something Su Ming had left behind for the ninth summit, and it was also the protection that would forever protect the ninth summit. Su Ming was the one who had left that stone monument, and the words on it were carved by him. There were not many of them, only a few lines. All those who harm even a single plant in the ninth summit will be killed. All those who harm the servants of the ninth summit will be killed. All those who harm the disciples of the ninth summit will be killed. These 3 lines of words exuded a monstrous killing intent, along with a powerful, intimidating presence that reverberated in the world. If that was all, it might not have been enough to intimidate the powerful warriors But the hint of life cultivation's presence contained within those 3 lines of words was enough to make those who had attained great completion in the Berserker soul realm feel apprehensive. It was enough to make all the immortals tremble. These words meant that there was a person in the 9th summit who had already reached the threshold of life cultivation. It also meant that this person was one of the few people in the land of Berserkers who had truly broken through the limitations of the cultivation method due to the death of the god of Berserkers in the land of Berserkers. This also meant that once anyone committed the actions of those 3 lines of words, then they would have to face a terrifying enemy, a person who would not rest until one of them died and would kill a heinous number of people. This was a blatant intimidation, and it was also Su Ming's thoughts. Besides, the presence and words were not the only things on a mountain stone. There was also a drop of Su Ming's blood on it. His blood could allow Sima Xin to borrow his life. His blood could allow Hu Zi to recover. And his blood also contained Su Ming's will. Once it exploded, it could bring forth the full power of Su Ming's attack, because Su Ming's principles of life were gathered in that drop of blood. That blood was imprinted on the stone monument, but it was in Hu Zi's hands. With that blood, if the 9th summit truly ran into a disaster that they could not fight against, Su Ming would be able to sense it. On the day Su Ming left, Bai Su stood at the top of the mountain and looked at Su Ming's back disappearing into the distance. She watched quietly. She liked Su Ming. She did not know about this in the past, and it was only after they parted that this feeling was carved into her heart. It was just that everything had changed. The reflection of the moon in the mirror was no longer a real moon, but a blooming flower. As a member of the Bai clan, she inherited the destiny of the Milky Way. Although she didn't cultivate the strange art of the black wooden block, she knew that the people of the Bai clan were destined to live alone for the rest of their lives. Perhaps it could be changed. Perhaps it could not be changed. If they persisted, then the names in the Bai clan's genealogy book, their deaths, or theirs would become a vivid, bloody reminder of the fate of the Milky Way. The river water came from the heavens, and in its loneliness, it would return to the heavens. His life flowed like a river. It was especially so for the life of a stone falling from the river in the Milky Way. It only lasted for a short period of time. It would reflect the color of a water droplet under the sun, and in the blink of an eye, it would disappear. Once Su Ming left, the 9th summit sank into silence. The protective screen of light around the island appeared once again to envelop the island and continue protecting it. Su Ming did not know just who had placed this screen of light. He had asked the old man in white before, but he did not have an answer either. He only knew that on the day the disaster spread through the land, the instant Heaven Gate rose into the sky and disappeared, and all the people thought that this place would be filled with death, the protective screen of light suddenly appeared. No one knew where it came from, and no one saw just who had placed it. In the midst of the silence, the people who had been humiliated under Bailing's mighty pressure settled down in the 9th summit once again. Su Ming did not chase them away, but gave them a home. There was no need for those who had no home to return to make things difficult for those who were the same. Su Ming left. He walked out of the screen of light around the island and cast his gaze towards the east. That was where Eastern Wastelands was located. However, as he stood on the Dead Sea, there was no one around him. Only the sounds of the waves and the moans of the wind accompanied him. The loneliness that had been buried in his heart grew stronger. Su Ming flew forward quietly towards Eastern Wastelands and gradually disappeared into the distance. The Dead Sea beneath him covered the entire land. There were places Su Ming was familiar with in the depths of the sea, just like Han Mountain City and the chain of Han Mountain were here. A day later, Su Ming stood calmly in midair. He did not run into a single person on his way. It was as if the world had died, as if he was the only one left in it. The only thing that accompanied him was the wind and the waves. Su Ming looked at the Dead Sea beneath him. In his memories, this was Han Mountain City before the disaster, but now he knew that Han Mountain was no longer at the bottom of the sea. The continents shattered like a mirror shattering. The distances between the continents varied, and the locations in his memories were just memories. They were not the real locations. If he wanted to search for them, then he could only dive into the depths of the sea and slowly search for them. On the way, the bald crane had also noticed Su Ming's dejection and did not bother him. Instead, as it flew, it would look around and occasionally look at the seawater and its surroundings, attracted by all the things that were shining. 3 days passed by without Su Ming's knowledge. He did not move quickly. As he walked in midair, the scenes in his memories gradually became indistinct. Eventually, he saw a small island on the Dead Sea. This place was incredibly far away from freezing Sky Clan. Based on its location, it should be near the border between the shamans and berserkers of the land of South Morning. That island stood alone on the Dead Sea. It did not have a protective screen of light, neither did it have any form of protection. In fact, if Su Ming did not look closely, he would not be able to notice it in the dark. That island was simply too small. Su Ming had seen a few islands like this on his way. There was not a single hint of life on each of them. In the dead silence, not a single living soul could be found. Even if there were any, they were all corpses of the dead. Su Ming averted his gaze from the island. He took a huge step forward and turned into a long arc. The bald crane followed behind him. Just as the man and crane were about to fly past each other in midair, Su Ming's body came to an abrupt halt. He turned his head around, and when he looked at the island once again, he was stunned. The faint light of a fire was shining in the darkness of the island, just like the stars in the past. It was not just one ball of fire, but a dozen-something places. Cheers and laughter also came from the island at that moment, mixing with the sounds of the waves around them and spreading through the area. Su Ming could clearly remember that when he looked at the island just now, there was no fire on it. He also did not believe that if there were berserkers on this island, then they would be able to survive in the Dead Sea without any form of protection for the past few years. This was impossible. A glint appeared in Su Ming's eyes. He spread his divine sense outwards and covered the entire island, but what he saw was only emptiness. There was not a single living soul within it. But everything he saw with his eyes was so real. Su Ming fell silent. With one move, he charged towards the island. By his side, the bald crane scratched its feathers and cast him a sideways glance. Then, while mumbling under its breath, it also followed him. After a moment, Su Ming stood on the soil of the island. The sea breeze filled the air, bringing with it a fishy stench. Besides the faint light from the fire before him, everything else was dark. With a calm expression, Su Ming walked towards the place where the light was coming from. The island was very small. Not long after Su Ming walked out, he saw the light from the fire in the distance. He could also hear the sounds of cheers and laughter, as well as the sounds of children playing. Then, right before Su Ming, he saw a tribe. Su Ming shuddered. This was a small tribe, and there were simple fences around it. There were bonfires lit in the tribe during the night, and there were berserkers of both sexes singing merrily around them. There were also children chasing after each other by the bonfires, and their laughter was as clear as silver bells. There was also a nursery rhyme coming from the mouths of the children chasing after each other. It fused together with the happiness of the adults who would occasionally turn their heads to look at the children, causing Su Ming to have an indescribable feeling when the nursery rhyme fell into his ears. The same flower blooms for 1,000 years, and I alone watch the oceans turn into mulberry fields. With one smile, I look through 1,000 years, and how many times will I know that my Lord has come to the world? As the youthful voice appeared, a whimpering song of a sun came from one of the skin tents in the tribe. There was sadness in that song, but it fused perfectly with the voice, causing Su Ming to stop moving. He stood quietly outside the tribe and listened. He was familiar with this tribe. How could he not be familiar with it? He had come to this place twice before. The first time was with his master, Tian Xiezi. The second time was when he was alone. Right now, it was the third time. Su Ming had originally forgotten about this place. This sort of small tribe would not have existed during the disaster. Yet now, on this island, in this dark place where he could see nothing with his divine sense, but where he could only see sparks of fire with his naked eyes, he had returned once again. The same flower blooms for 1,000 years, and I alone watched through 1,000 years with one smile. Su Ming mumbled. This was the tribe where the old Sun Maker was. Su Ming walked forward quietly into the tribe. The children chasing after the sun did not seem to have seen him. As they laughed, they ran towards him and passed through Su Ming's body while still playing. The people around the bonfires did not seem to be able to see Su Ming either. It was as if they were in a different world. Sometimes, prosperity did not mean extravagance. It was just a form of liveliness. In this prosperity, Su Ming's loneliness was like smoke that could not be covered up by the emptiness. Su Ming moved through the crowd. He looked at the happy, smiling faces and listened to the adorable voices. He quietly arrived outside the tent from which the sad song of the sun came. After remaining silent for some time, he lifted his hand and lifted the tent flap. I promised the immortal renegade Alliance's master that I would give him a book, but the publisher still hasn't sent it to me. I've made everyone wait for a long time. If they still haven't sent it to me in a few days, I'll go buy it myself. There will be more that will explode over the next few days, and it's still brewing. Don't worry, everyone. In less than 3 days, it will definitely explode. I'm prepared to challenge the limit of surpassing 5 chapters. Finally, I'm begging for monthly votes, recommendation votes, and encouragement. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian. Come and vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 642. 3 days in a row. I've thought about challenging the 6th chapter tomorrow, according to my plan. But since everyone is so worried, I'll do it for 3 days in a row. This is another kind of challenge. I'll do it for everyone. Today is the first day. During this period of time, I've seen every single reader's hard work and exhaustion. I've seen all of you trying to get Chuimo first place. All of you have sacrificed so much more than me. I have to do it. Even if I have to grit my teeth, I have to do it. Only then will I feel better toward all of you. Actually, other than writing novels, I have many shortcomings. The most serious one is that I don't have enough EQ. Otherwise, I wouldn't have used 4 chapters to write yesterday's 2 chapters. I don't have enough EQ. There are many things that I can't say in my heart. I don't know when to say them, and I'm not good at communicating with everyone. Every time I finish writing a novel, my brain will crash. When I see everyone's thoughts, I can only remember them, engrave them in my heart, and carve them into my bones. These emotions are stuck in my chest, but I don't know how to express them. I'm so stupid. I really don't know how to express them. This is me, a slightly plump person with insufficient EQ. Other than shouting a few times, I don't know how to stir up emotions. If you acknowledge me and like me, I'll give my all. If you don't acknowledge me and like me, you can blame me. I won't talk back. I can see it, and I'll choose to accept it. Today, I'm still going to shout like a fool. I'm going to fight, fight, fight to the end, fight for first place, fight, fight, fight. 3 days in a row for your passion, for your support. That's all I'll say. To be continued. If you like this novel, please come to Chidian. Come to vote for it. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 643. At the instant he lifted the flap of the tent, a gentle light spread out from within. The light from that light looked like beams of light that shone on Su Ming's body. The sound of the zither seemed to become clearer as the flap of the leather tent was lifted. There was an old man sitting in the tent. He held a bone sun in his hand and placed it by his lips. His eyes were closed as he played a sorrowful song. That song filled the air, making Su Ming feel as if he had been separated from the world at that moment. He walked into the tent quietly and sat down before the old man. He closed his eyes and listened to the song. His heart also flew along with the song, and he had no idea where it was going. Perhaps he was just wandering. Time trickled by bit. Su Ming still had his eyes closed. His soul seemed to be unable to find a place to stay, and he continued wandering about. At that moment, all the hair on the bald crane's body was standing on end. It widened its eyes and continuously looked around it. Terror appeared on its face. In its eyes, the area around it was empty. Besides Su Ming, there was not a single other person around. Su Ming sat down cross-legged in the distance on the empty land and closed his eyes. No one knew what he was thinking about. If that was the case, then the bald crane would not be terrified. What terrified it was the strange power on the island. That power was invisible, but made it unable to move even a single inch. The area was originally empty, but the occasional sounds of children playing and laughing echoed in its ears. It was as if there was a group of children it could not see chasing after it. Occasionally, a freezing chill would seep into the bald crane's heart, as if the place where it was located had been pierced through by the children chasing after it. Its teeth chattered, but it could not move its body. It looked at Su Ming, then at its surroundings, and fear towards the island that came from the depths of its heart rose within it. Su Ming had no idea how much time had passed, but the sky was still dark, as if it would never be bright again. The sounds of the sun gradually grew weaker, and when they eventually disappeared completely, an old voice reached his ears. "You still came in the end." Su Ming opened his eyes and looked at the old man who had put down the bone sun. There was a kind smile on the old man's face. His eyes might have seemed normal, but Su Ming knew that he was blind. "Senior, did you know that I would come?" Su Ming asked softly. This was the third time he came to this place, and each time, the feeling he got was completely different. "Because of your confusion, you have been wandering around. That is why you came here." The old man looked at Su Ming, and the smile on his face was incredibly kind. He spoke words that Su Ming did not understand. Su Ming was silent for a moment before he suddenly asked, "What is a wanderer?" "If my heart doesn't have a place to rest, I'll be wandering no matter where I go." Su Ming's heart trembled. The words echoed in his mind, causing him to be stunned for a long, long time. Indeed, his heart did not have a place to rest. Dark Mountain was fake. Besides Uzi, the ninth summit was already desolate. His life had always been a wanderer, not knowing the direction of home, not knowing the cause and effect of all this, not knowing where the cycle was. "Who are you?" After some time, a bright glint appeared in Su Ming's eyes. "When you know who you are, you will know who I am." The old man shook his head and touched the bone in his hand. His fingernails made clicking sounds as he touched it. The voice reverberated in the tent and spread outside. The old man's eyes were not looking at Su Ming. He was looking at the tent with an empty gaze as he asked softly, "What did you see outside, child? Tell me, what did you see?" "This place doesn't exist. This island is empty, and the people from this tribe outside should have already died. This place is surrounded by a mass of ghosts, including you, Senior." "I believe it's the same," Su Ming said calmly. "What you see might not be the truth. What you think doesn't exist might not necessarily not exist." The old man closed his eyes, and his voice fell into Su Ming's ears. Confusion appeared in Su Ming's eyes. That confusion ran deep, and it surrounded his heart, refusing to leave even after a long time had passed. They exist. You saw them, but you didn't believe them. Others can't see them, so they will be afraid. It's like how you open your eyes when millions of people are asleep. You are lucky, but also sad, because you don't believe in what you see, because once you do, you will become someone the world will not tolerate. "Because you woke up," the old man said softly. There seemed to be a profound meaning behind his words, causing Su Ming to be confused. Millions of people have woken up, but you are still asleep. Is it because you don't want to wake up? Or perhaps you think that you have already woken up? What is sleeping and what is waking up? All of this is because the world you see is not visible to others, the old man said slowly. There was an ancient air to his voice, causing all those who heard it to feel as if they had seen the passage of time. It's just like fate. It has obedience and resistance. It's just like life. It has happiness and sorrow. It's just like you and me. What I see, you cannot see, and what you see, I cannot see. Child, do you understand now? The old man opened his eyes. His empty gaze seemed to be looking at Su Ming, and he smiled kindly. Su Ming remained silent for a moment before he lifted his head and looked at the old man. A hint of understanding appeared in his eyes as he spoke languidly. "If you don't care about the past, then why should you care about the future? If you don't care about who I am, then why should you think about who I am? The high wind might be strong, but as long as it can't blow away the fire in my heart, then sooner or later, the world will be set ablaze. When the old man heard Su Ming's words, happiness appeared on his smile, and there was even a hint of praise on his face. Sooner or later, the world will be set ablaze. This is life. It's not your life, and neither is it anyone else's life. It's the life of the world. Isn't it the same for life? Why must you be so stubborn? Honestly, you still don't understand. The old man smiled. Su Ming fell silent. When you know who you are, you will no longer be you. When you no longer know who you are, you will be you. The old man lifted his right hand, and the bone sun in his hand immediately flew out and floated towards Su Ming. Take it. It will show you the way home. The old man's voice echoed in the air. Su Ming looked at the bone sun floating towards him. More accurately speaking, this item was the spine of a wild beast. It was very smooth, and there were signs of time on it. It will block the disaster you are destined to face in your life. This disaster is about to arrive. If you can get through it, then another line will be added to your life, and from then on, it will be even more difficult for others to control your fate. The old man looked at Su Ming, smiled, and closed his eyes. We've met 3 times, and it's as if we are fated through 3 lifetimes. The moment we walk out of this tent, I will give you the serendipity of 3 days to activate the construction of your berserker soul. The old man's hoarse voice echoed in the air. Su Ming's gaze fell on the bone sun, and he quietly held it in his hand. When he looked at the old man, there was a slightly dazed look on his face. After a long while, when the old man no longer spoke, Su Ming wrapped his fist in his palm towards him and bowed deeply. He might not know the old man's name or where he came from, but he could feel the wisdom and age within the old man. Once he bowed quietly, Su Ming seemed to have understood something. He turned around and walked out of the tent. He lifted the flap, and just as he was about to lift his foot, he suddenly shuddered. It was as if his body had frozen up, and he forgot to put his right foot down. His body trembled, his soul trembled, and disbelief appeared in his eyes. His heart also started pounding rapidly at that instant, because the instant he lifted the flap, he did not see the island, did not see the darkness in the sky, did not see the rolling clouds that covered the moon in the darkness, and did not see the ripples in the sea around him. What he heard was not the roars of the waves, neither was it the light from the fire around him. What he smelled was not the fishy stench of the seawater, nor the bitterness of loneliness. The disbelief in Su Ming's eyes made it difficult for him to believe everything he saw, heard, and heard. He turned around swiftly, wanting to cast a glance at the old man in the tent, but all he saw was emptiness. The tent was no longer behind him, the serendipity of 3 days. The old man's words appeared in Su Ming's head. He closed his eyes quietly, and tears fell down his cheeks. He saw the bright blue sky, and under it was the dark mountain that was as large as 5 fingers in his memories. He smelled the scent of home, and he heard it. Big brother La Su, I found you. So you were hiding here. You lost. Now it's time for me and Pippi to hide. You came to find us. A young voice filled with joy reached Su Ming's ears. The sky and earth, the clouds and the clouds. The sky in eastern wastelands might be the same as the sky in south morning, but there was a huge difference between them. The sky in eastern wastelands was the sky where the wind and clouds moved, and it was the combination of fog and the sky. Not all of this place was filled with rolling clouds. There were quite a number of places where rays of light would shine through the cracks in the clouds and shine on the ground during the day. From the distance, this scene was filled with a beauty that could shock people. The dark clouds and the powerful light formed the sky in eastern wastelands. The Dead Sea filled the area beyond eastern wastelands. The seawater roared and the waves surged violently, as if they possessed the power to destroy the earth and the earth. But they could not shake eastern wastelands. They could only roar at the edge, unable to cause too many changes to the gigantic eastern wastelands. As the largest continent in the land of berserkers, after the land of berserkers was split apart, eastern wastelands had always been an incredibly powerful existence. At that moment, at the edge of eastern wastelands near South Morning was a mountain that towered into the clouds at the center of eastern wastelands. At the same time, the sky and earth roared, and two powerful rays of light that were so piercing to the eyes and filled the hearts of countless people who saw them with shock and a presence that caused all their cultivation bases to instantly stop circulating descended from the boundless sky. One of the two powerful rays of light descended on the mountain at the center of eastern wastelands. Tens of thousands of people at the foot of the mountain worshipped them, and as the mountain rumbled, a hall could be seen at the top of the mountain. The powerful light enveloped the hall, and it was several thousands of feet wide. It connected the ground and the sky. At that moment, there were no longer any words left to say. Only by getting first place could they be peerless. Give me monthly votes. Give me first place in the first round of Seeking Demons. To be continued. If you like this work, please come Come and vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 644. The other powerful ray of light descended on a plain at the edge of eastern wastelands near South Morning. At the instant it landed on the ground, it caused the ground to tremble and stirred up a ring-shaped wave of impact. It made all the eastern wastelanders in the area and all the people who were near the islands near eastern wastelands feel as if there were thousands of mountains pressing down on them. They coughed up blood, and some of their bodies even exploded. They could not withstand the powerful pressure that had suddenly appeared. This was the descent of a powerful warrior. The appearance of the two powerful rays of light shook the entire eastern wastelands and attracted an innumerable amount of attention. It even caught the attention of the powerful warriors in eastern wastelands. It was especially so for the east of eastern wastelands. At that moment, a wave of fog that surged into the sky appeared out of nowhere and swept through the world. It spread out with a bang and covered a circular area of 100,000 leagues. It covered the sky and earth, and the people could vaguely see that it had turned into a gigantic face that was glaring at the two pillars of light. Detion, the human face in the fog, let out a shocking roar. Its roar reverberated in the air and spread in all directions before spreading out with a loud bang. At the instant it spoke, the pillar of light in the hall at the top of the mountain that was worshipped by the 10,000 people at the center of eastern wastelands let out an even stronger light. As that light surrounded the hall, a shadow descended from the pillar of light. His face could not be seen clearly. The only thing that could be seen was the shadow disappearing into the hall at the top of the mountain with a flash. After a moment, the door to the hall opened, and a person walked out slowly from within. He was middle-aged and had an awe-inspiring appearance. His black hair spilled over his shoulders, and he wore dazzling emperor's robe. He did not wear a crown, and his eyes were long and narrow. There was a murderous air about him that made all those who saw him feel fear. He walked out slowly, and at the instant he stood outside the hall, he swung his arm and lifted his head to look at the sky in the distance. Then he sucked a deep breath, in death aura that I haven't seen for a long time. At the instant he said these words, the 10,000 people kneeling at the foot of the mountain spoke together with incredibly respectful expressions. Their voices were like waves that echoed in all directions. We, the disciples of Great Leaf, immortal sect, greet progenitor Detion. We welcome the descent of the progenitor's clone into the berserker's eastern wastelands. That voice echoed in the air, and it was deafening. The middle-aged man did not care about those respectful voices. He breathed in the air, and the murderous aura in his eyes became even stronger. A thin layer of fog came from his body, and as it surrounded him, it charged into the sky, causing all the clouds in the sky to collapse. A pillar of white fog that covered an area of 100,000 leagues became a distinct existence in eastern wastelands. He was Detion. It was another clone that Detion had sent to the land of berserkers after being separated for many years. The matter did not end there. At the instant Tion's clone descended on the mountain at the center of eastern wastelands, at the instant a large number of people who were shocked and coughed up blood, and some of them even died, there was also an illusory figure that charged towards the ground like a bolt of lightning from within the pillar of light that surged into the sky. Almost in an instant, that illusory figure touched the ground within the pillar of light. At the instant he did so, the entire plains crumbled with a bang. Gigantic cracks tore through the ground, and layers of earth tumbled backwards before sweeping outwards in all directions. The shocking booming sounds continued, turning into echoes that repeated over and over again. When they gradually faded away after a moment, the plains on the ground were no longer there. What appeared in its place was a gigantic pit. It was as if a shooting star had fallen from the sky and crashed into the ground. The pit was several hundreds of thousands of feet in size. At that moment, when the powerful light that covered it gradually faded away, a figure floated out slowly from within the pit. It was a middle-aged man with an emperor's crown on his head and an aloof expression on his face. He was dressed in an emperor's robe, and his face was handsome. There was also an ancient air about him, and the emperor's robe filled him with an awe-inspiring air. At the instant he floated up, he looked in the direction of south morning calmly, and a freezing glare that could freeze the heavens appeared in his eyes. "Destiny, you can't escape." A hoarse voice slowly tumbled out of the person's mouth. He lifted his right hand and swiftly seized the air with his fingers. With it, an invisible ripple swiftly swept out in all directions with his body as the center. The ripple continued spreading outwards. 100,000 lis, 1 million lis, 10 million lis, until it covered a small part of eastern wastelands. No one would be able to notice the area covered by the ripple, and it would not affect the living beings in the area. However, the area covered by the ripple had covered most of the path from South Morning to eastern wastelands. Unless that person took a huge detour to cross the Dead Sea and stepped into eastern wastelands from another direction, then the middle-aged man in the emperor's robe would definitely know that someone had come to South Morning. Besides, even if there was truly someone who took a detour and stepped into eastern wastelands, with the middle-aged man's abilities, he would definitely be prepared for it. This person's appearance was exactly the same as the person who had descended in the hall at the top of the mountain at the center of eastern wastelands. He was also Tion's clone. This time, Tion did not send one clone to the land of berserkers, but two. Tion's thoughts could be seen from the spots where they descended. The one who descended at the top of the mountain at the center of the mountain was there to defend Great Leaf Immortal Sect. He was there to fight against the black fog that was filled with malicious aura in the eastern part of eastern wastelands. And the clone that had descended near the edge of the land of South Morning was clearly only targeting one person, and that was Su Ming. The crowned Tion clone looked in the direction of South Morning and slowly walked out of the pit. When he stood on the ground, there were 4 berserkers from eastern wastelands standing several thousands of feet away from him. At that moment, they were looking at him with pale faces. There were also 3 corpses that had exploded beside these 4 people. There were originally 7 of them, but 3 of them had died because they could not withstand the pressure. The other 4 coughed up blood, and their cultivation bases had shattered, but they did not die. Tion's expression was cold and dark as he looked at South Morning, but he was frowning. The moment he descended just now, he had sent his divine sense sweeping through the area, but he did not notice Destiny's presence or the ripples of power. He could not find him. After a moment of pensive silence, Tion let out a cold harumph and sat down cross-legged. The instant he did so, the 4 people several thousands of feet away coughed up blood at the same time. Their heads exploded, and they died on the ground. The 7 corpses did not have heads. Only their bodies remained. Blood dyed the entire area red, causing the place to fall into dead silence. Tion did not pay any attention to any of this. He only lifted his right hand and formed a seal before swinging his arm. Immediately, the 7 corpses shuddered, and they crawled up slowly. Once they got up, they tore apart their clothes to reveal their chests. At that moment, An indistinct ghost face appeared on their chests. That ghost face seemed to be roaring, causing the 7 corpses to charge in 7 different directions as time passed by. All the people who came to this place out of curiosity, due to the pillar of light, had their heads explode the instant they saw DT on, and once the ghost face appeared on their corpses, they would leave in all directions. Everyone went in a different direction. I'll continue searching with my divine sense. I like to see just how much longer you can hide. DT closed his eyes and did not move. This was the disaster the old Sunmaker had mentioned to Su Ming. The disaster had arrived, and at that moment, Su Ming was still on the small island in the Dead Sea. He stood there quietly, as if he had lost his soul. A layer of fog gradually appeared around him and covered his body. It also enveloped the bald crane within it, and eventually, once it covered the entire island, it was as if it had disappeared from the Dead Sea. Su Ming looked at the little girl before him, who was holding a doll in her arms. She had her eyes wide open, and she was looking at him in an incredibly adorable manner. The joy on the child's face clearly showed just how happy she was at that moment. Tong tong. Su Ming stared at the little girl before him in a daze. His body trembled. He was not just looking at the child, but also at the incredibly familiar sight of the tribe that was located in the depths of his memories. Dark Mountain Tribe. Every blade of grass, every tree, every house, everything, even that familiar presence, was clearly the Dark Mountain in his memories. It was the place he thought he would never be able to return to, that fake place. Yet even though he knew that it was fake, even though he had seen Bailing, Chun Exen, and experienced the vicissitudes of life at that moment, he could not deceive himself. His eyes could not deceive his heart either. He deeply longed for his home. Dark Mountain. He saw Bailing practicing his archery in the distance, and the tall figure of the head of the guards in Dark Mountain guiding his son on how to shoot the strongest arrow. He saw Chun Exen sitting by the side. When she looked at Bailing, there was gentleness in her gaze. She held a bowl filled with water in her hand, and she looked as if she was about to walk up and hand it to the sweating Bailing. He saw Wu La, who had died in his arms in his memories, mumbling Mo Su's name. This stubborn girl was surrounded by a large group of children at that moment, and she was telling them stories. Her lively expressions and exaggerated words caused her to let out bell-like laughter along with the children. Within that laughter was a happiness that came from the bottom of their hearts. Su Ming also saw Lei Chun, his best brother. He was crying and had his head lowered as he was continuously reprimanded by a middle-aged woman before him. Su Ming looked at all of this with a dumbfounded expression. He had forgotten everything. His mind was blank. Tong Tong's words beside him seemed to have become distant and indistinct. Then he saw 2 men walking out a big tent. One of them was the tribe leader of Dark Mountain Tribe, Chunlong. He was frowning, as if there was something weighing on his mind. The man following behind him was Shan Hen, who had left a deep impression in Su Ming's memories. Shan Hen was still the same as he was in Su Ming's memories. He was sullen and unwilling to speak. His eyes would occasionally look around him, but no one could tell whether he was happy or angry. He was like a wild beast that hid its presence. The second update, the last week, I'll fight till the end for the monthly votes. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian. Come and vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 645. The sun set in the west and gradually disappeared. The golden dusk slowly disappeared as well. As the sky darkened, the stars in the sky formed the outline of the starry sky in Su Ming's memories. The brilliant moon also made those who looked at it feel homesick. Yet Su Ming did not know how a person who was in his hometown could feel homesick. He only knew that on the first night he returned to Dark Mountain, he still missed this place as he looked at the moon. He saw the elder, he saw Lei Chun, he saw all the people in his memories, and Su Ming's heart gradually calmed down. Every single blade of grass and tree in this place was incredibly familiar to him. Everything here was buried in his heart, and he would never forget it. Bailing was still cold towards him, but Chen Xian was still slightly concerned about him. The house that belonged to Su Ming was clean and spotless, and that was Chen Xian's silent care. Perhaps it was love, or perhaps it had nothing to do with love. Chen Xian might have liked Su Ming before, but perhaps she liked Bei Ling even more. Wu Lei's disdain. This girl, who was not particularly beautiful, fell into his arms and mumbled Mo Su's name in his memories. Her beauty surpassed everything else, and it was branded deeply into Su Ming's heart, causing him to be unable to forget it. Now that he saw it again, there was only warmth in Su Ming's heart. There was nothing else. Lei Chen's hearty laughter and the oath he swore made Su Ming feel the warmth between brothers. He did not want to believe that all of this was fake. The elder's kindness and warm embrace also made Su Ming believe that he had a dream the previous night. It was a cruel dream that had nothing to do with romance, but was filled with blood and time. Now, perhaps he had woken up from his dream. Su Ming sat outside his house and lifted his head to look at the moon in the sky. The dinner he had at Lei Chen's house made him remember many, many things. There were only a few lights in the tribe at night. It was quiet all around. There was no wind. Yet there was a mournful song from the sun echoing in the night. It was a song played by the people in the tribe, and Su Ming could not forget it. Perhaps it won't be 3 days. Perhaps yesterday was a dream. Perhaps I could stay in Dark Mountain forever, Su Ming mumbled. Su Ming mumbled. Lei Chen was not with him. At night, he was scolded by his mother again and was forced to stay at home. He had to pretend to be asleep. Su Ming looked at the moon in the sky quietly and listened to the song of the sun. It was as if he was dreaming and did not know he was a guest. All of a sudden, he wanted to take a look at Witty, who might not know him yet. When he thought of Bai Ling, Su Ming felt a stab of pain in his heart. The promise he had lost was gone forever. When he turned his head back, he could only hear sighs, but he could no longer see each other. Su Ming stood up and walked towards the tribe's gate. Yet the moment he reached the gate and was about to leave, his footsteps faltered because a person walked towards him from the darkness. "Who are you?" An eerie voice came from the figure as he gradually walked out of the shadows and into the moonlight. He was Shan Hen. A cold and dark look appeared in his eyes as he stared at Su Ming. When he spoke, faint ripples of his cultivation base could be seen on his right hand, as if he was about to form a blade. "You're not Su Ming. You can deceive others, but you can't deceive me. Every single time Su Ming looks at me, his gaze is different from yours," Shan Hen said in a low voice as he stared at Su Ming. Su Ming looked at Shan Hen quietly. In his memories, this was a senior of his tribe that he had killed with his own hands. "I am Su Ming," Su Ming said softly and walked forward. Su Ming spoke softly and walked forward. Shan Hen's expression changed, and he lifted his right hand swiftly, but the moment he did so, Su Ming walked past him with light footsteps. Shan Hen's entire body shuddered, and he found himself unable to lower his lifted right hand. During that instant, when Su Ming walked past him at a speed that surpassed what his eyes could see, he had felt a powerful wave of power that suffocated him. That ripple was very faint and only spread out 5 feet. Only he could feel it. The strength of that aura surpassed all the berserkers he had seen before, and it even surpassed those in the transcendence realm. He had a strong feeling that with just one thought, this person could destroy him, this tribe, and this entire land. In the midst of his shock, Shan Hen's entire body was drenched in sweat. After a long while, he slowly turned his head around, but he could no longer see Su Ming. Su Ming walked on the path in the forest. His footsteps were not quick as he walked towards Bai Ling's tribe in the middle of the night. As he walked, Su Ming stopped. He hesitated for a moment, then looked at Dark Mountain in the dark. Suddenly, he lifted his right hand, placed it by his lips, and let out a sharp whistle. The whistle reverberated in the air and gradually disappeared into the night. Su Ming waited quietly. An hour later, a fiery red figure suddenly charged towards him from the forest in the distance. Along with the appearance of that figure were joyful cries. That fiery red figure was Xiao Hong. It charged forward and soon appeared before Su Ming. With an excited look on its face, it danced around Su Ming a few times before sitting down on his shoulder and grabbing Su Ming's hair with its claws, fiddling with it nonstop. Xiaohong. Su Ming looked at the little monkey on his shoulder and let it play with his hair. He lifted his hand and gently caressed its body. A sentimental and complicated smile appeared on his face. "We meet again," Xiaohong hissed a few times, looking as if they had indeed met again. It glared at Su Ming and gestured at him for a long time, expressing its anger. It was as if it was complaining that Su Ming had not appeared for a long time. In the end, Xiaohong gestured with 3 fingers. Su Ming knew that it meant 3 days, or perhaps 3 months. It could also mean 3 years, 30 years, or even longer. Only Xiaohong would know the specifics. As he stroked Xiaohong's fur, Su Ming turned into a long arc and charged towards Bai Ling's tribe. Before long, Dark Dragon Tribe's gigantic fence appeared before him. There were also long spears standing upright on the fence. Those were the tribe's guards. Su Ming looked at Dark Dragon Tribe and walked towards it. No one noticed his arrival until he reached the tribe. When he spread his divine sense outwards, he found a figure that made his heart ache in his memories. It was Bai Ling's house. Bai Ling had already fallen asleep in the dark. There was a peaceful look on her beautiful face. It was a little different compared to the wild look on her face when she opened her eyes. Su Ming stood quietly by Bai Ling's bed and looked at the beautiful girl. He looked at the smile on her lips as she slept. He did not know what kind of beautiful thing she was dreaming about. Su Ming's heart ached. The scenes in his memories appeared between him and Bai Ling. Their meeting under the blood moon, their running around in circles in the snowy night, their whispers as they told each other their stories, and the final moment when their hair turned white amidst the snowflakes, until the promise Su Ming could not keep. All of these turned into a wave of sadness that filled Su Ming's heart. He looked at Bai Ling with a dumbfounded expression. He looked at the girl who had been branded deeply in his heart. She was his first love. "Ling Er, I'm back," Su Ming mumbled softly. There was a gentle look in his eyes. He lifted his hand, wanted to touch Bai Ling's face gently. His actions were gentle, but the moment his hand was about to touch Bai Ling's face, Bai Ling opened her eyes. She looked at Su Ming quietly. The wildness in her eyes was a sight that Su Ming would never forget. Su Ming's hand froze for a moment, but it was only for a moment before he touched Bai Ling's face without any hesitation. Her face was a little cold and very soft, causing the gentleness in Su Ming's eyes to become even stronger. Bai Ling did not dodge. Instead, she widened her eyes and looked at Su Ming, completely stunned. When Su Ming lifted his hand, the gentleness in his eyes remained. He looked at Bai Ling deeply, then stood up, turned his head around, and was about to leave. "Who are you?" Bai Ling's terrified and weak voice came from behind him. "Su Ming." Su Ming walked towards the door of the house. At the instant he touched Bai Ling, the cold look on her face made him understand many things in anguish. This place was not real. This was fake. This was the serendipity the old Sun Maker had mentioned. This was an illusory world created with Su Ming's memories as the center. This was a void world, because in this hot season, the cold look on Bai Ling's face was the last thing Su Ming felt when he was in the snow. All of this was an illusion. This serendipity that lasted for 3 days was for Su Ming to understand the existence of fate in the world of his memories. You can choose not to believe it. You can think that the dark mountain in your memories is fake. As long as you attack and kill all the people you are familiar with here, the Elder, Lei Chun, Bai Ling, Wu La, Chun Exine, Bai Ling, and all the others, as long as you attack, you will naturally be able to see the expressions on everyone's faces after they are killed by you. At that time, you will be able to tell whether all of this is real or fake. At that time, you will also be able to reverse Dark Mountain and completely forget about it. From then on, you will no longer be connected to it, and it will no longer affect your emotions. It does not matter whether there will be people who will use Dark Mountain as a trap to do anything in the future. As long as you choose to attack, then everything will disappear. It will be as if everything has truly awakened. You will shatter the world you do not believe in, and the people who are manipulating your fate. If you believe in it, then you will have the determination to bear the series of difficulties, the series of grief, and the parting that will appear because of Dark Mountain in the future. No matter what choice he made, this would be a short period of completion. During this completion, Su Ming would be able to take half a step towards the end of the Bone Sacrifice realm and step into the Berserker Soul realm. Because this completion could turn into determination, Su Ming would not be lost when he stepped into the Berserker Soul realm, which would increase his chances of success. Why do I feel that you're so familiar? Bai Ling's voice traveled into Su Ming's ears. She sat up behind him and stared at him blankly. Don't go, she whispered softly and got off the bed. She leaned against Su Ming's back gently. Starlight shone through the tent and shone on the ground indistinctly, fusing with the moonlight. Su Ming could not tell the difference between the stars and the moon, could not tell whether he had woken up from a dream, could not tell what was brilliant, could not tell what was sad, and could not tell what he missed. Neither could he tell whether it was a man or a woman, and neither could he tell who was crying. Even if he had a fleeting moment with the moon, he would not be able to bring away the companionship of this life after he had woken up from a dream. This attachment was getting further and further away. It would be better if he did not see her. There are no fights in these 4 chapters, but writing them is much more tiring than fighting. Tomorrow, I'll continue fighting. I'll see whether I can write 5 chapters tomorrow. I want monthly votes. Chapter 646. However, when he passed by the group of children surrounding Wu La, Shan Hen's gloomy aura disappeared. His expression did not change, but he took out some delicately carved beast bones from his bosom and handed them to the children. The children cheered happily in return. Su Ming saw Shan Hen smile. That smile might have been faint, and it might have only lasted for an instant. But Su Ming saw the hint of a happy smile appear at the corners of Shan Hen's lips at that instant. As the chief of the hunters and the leader of Dark Mountain Tribe, he had to be aloof. He had to make people afraid. He had to be the one with the most murderous aura and bloodthirsty aura. Only by doing so could he intimidate the outsiders and the rascals within the tribe. And he could protect his home. The world before his eyes gradually became clear. That clarity came from Su Ming's heart, not his eyes, because they were clear to begin with. The voices by his ears also gradually became clearer. Su Ming stood there and lowered his head to see his body. It was the body of teenager, Big Brother La Su. When Su Ming looked at his own body, Tong Tong's slightly anxious voice reached his ears. When he lifted his head to look, he saw Tong Tong pouting with a gloomy look on her face. You're cheating. I already found you, and you're pretending that you didn't hear me? I'm not playing with you anymore. The girl was clearly very angry. She pouted and no longer paid any attention to Su Ming. Instead, she hugged her doll and ran into the distance. Pippi quickly followed behind her, jumping into the distance with its master. 3 days of serendipity. Is it telling me that I can stay here in my home for 3 days? Su Ming closed his eyes, but after a few breaths, he immediately opened them because he did not want to waste the time he had to close his eyes. He wanted to use all the time he had to remember everything. It did not matter whether it was real or fake. This is my home. Su Ming took huge strides forward quickly. He wanted to see his elder. That feeling grew endlessly in his heart until it filled his entire body and soul. He walked past Lei Chun. Lei Chun had his head lowered and simply allowed his mother to scold him. When he saw Su Ming walking past him, he even made a face at him with a resigned look on his face. However, his mother somehow saw his expression, and she became even angrier. She grabbed Lei Chun's ear and began another round of scolding. Su Ming walked past Wu La and the group of children. His arrival made the children delighted, and when they called out to him, Tong Tong, who had just arrived, puffed up her cheeks and mumbled under her breath with a displeased look on her face. Brother La Su, you're shameless. You've already promised, but you're not playing anymore. As for Wu La, there was a hint of disdain on her face. She did not bother with Su Ming. Su Ming did not care about any of this. He smiled at the children, and with his heart filled with anxiety, he walked past them until he stood outside a house. It was the elder's house. He stood at the door and raised his right hand, but he didn't dare to lift the flap. He was afraid that all of this was just a dream, that all of this was fake. When he lifted the flap, he would see nothing and see nothing. His body was trembling. He was afraid. Is it little Su Ming? Why are you standing outside? Why aren't you coming in? As Su Ming was afraid and worried about his gains and losses, a familiar voice that made Su Ming's eyes instantly turned red echoed in his ears from the house. That voice was just as gentle and kind as he remembered it to be. That voice was just as loving as he remembered it to be, just like how a senior would speak. The moment Su Ming heard it, he could no longer hold himself back. He lifted the flap and saw Mo Sang, who was sitting cross-legged and looking at him with a smile on his face. The wrinkles on the elder's face were something Su Ming would never forget. The white in his hair was also a mark that Su Ming would never be able to get rid of. That gentle voice, that familiar presence, all of these things caused tears to fall from Su Ming's eyes the moment he saw the elder. At that moment, he was no longer a murderer who killed without batting an eyelid. Neither was he the Lord of Earth who caused Heaven Gate to crumble. Neither was he the fated kin who worshipped him. Neither was he the destiny who had gone out for many years and learned how to be cruel and endure. He was a wanderer who had left his home for many years, and when he finally returned, he was looking at his family. Elder. At that moment, Su Ming's body was that of a teenager. As tears fell from his eyes, he ran to his elder's side and hugged Mo Sang. His tears could not stop falling from his eyes. Elder, I miss you. I miss the tribe. I miss everything here, Elder. How many years of bitterness, how many years of longing, how many years of crying, and that false judgment? Su Ming no longer cared about these things. He did not want to think about them either. The only thought that existed in his mind at that moment was to hug his elder and not let go. This was the warmest place in his life. This was his family, his home. Even if it was fake, even if it did not exist, Su Ming did not want to think about it. He told himself that this place was real. The warmth was also real. Everything here was real. Mo Sang was momentarily stunned. He looked at Su Ming, who was crying while hugging him, and a puzzled look appeared on his face, but he did not say anything. Instead, he patted Su Ming's back, and the smile on his face became even more kind. Young La Su, why are you crying? This isn't like you. Come, tell me just who bullied you. I'll support you. At that moment, Su Ming had a lot of things he wanted to say, but he could not bring himself to say them. At that moment, could he tell the elder everything that had happened over the years? He did not want to break this warmth. He only had 3 days of warmth, and he treasured it. A deep wave of fatigue rose in Su Ming's heart, but he did not want to sleep because he could not bear to leave. After a long while, he wiped away his tears and slowly let go of the elder. He looked at the old man before him, who was slightly younger than in his memories, with a dumbfounded expression. Su Ming spoke softly. Elder, it's nothing. I just had a dream. What dream? What made my young La Su so afraid that he wanted to hug me and cry like he did a few years ago? The elder smiled kindly and patted Su Ming's head. I dreamt that a few years later, the tribe would fight against Black Mountain Tribe. I dreamt that the tribe would migrate, and I would leave. I also dreamt that I was alone and I was wandering the world. Su Ming mumbled, telling the elder about his experiences. His words were much shorter, but each word contained his entire life. As Su Ming spoke, the elder's smile gradually turned into a serious one. Gradually, he looked at Su Ming with a dumbfounded expression. After a long, long time, when Su Ming's dream ended, the elder frowned. Is it real or fake? The elder closed his eyes slightly. After a while, he opened them and looked at Su Ming. This is a dream. Now that you're awake, don't bother about everything in this dream. I can tell you I'm real. Su Ming nodded his head silently. He looked at the elder, and there was an endless amount of things he wanted to say. When the sky outside gradually darkened and a hint of fatigue appeared on the elder's face, Su Ming stood up gently. He wrapped his fist in his palm and bowed towards the elder. There was a reluctance to part, but it was also a reluctance to part. He walked out of the house. The sun set in the west. Gentle sunlight shone on the land, causing the shadows of houses and tents to appear in dark mountain tribe. Smoke rose from the chimneys. It was the smoke the people in the tribe used to prepare dinner. The smoke rose into the sky and fused with the clouds under the setting sun, making it look incredibly beautiful to those who saw it. Ever since he left Dark Mountain, the warmth that he had not felt since then appeared in Su Ming's heart. This warmth was different from the ninth summit. The ninth summit was filled with kindness, friendship, and the love between a teacher and a disciple, but this place was filled with the feeling of home. As he looked at the tribe members bustling about during dusk, the tribe's gate being opened, the warriors returning from their hunts, and all the things around him, Su Ming suddenly could not differentiate between reality and reality. He could not tell whether his actions the day before were just a dream, or whether what he saw now was just a dream. Su Ming stood there dumbfounded until an arm slapped his shoulder. Su Ming instinctively narrowed his eyes. He lifted his left hand and grabbed the hand on his shoulder. The moment he turned around, he pointed at the person behind him with his right hand, and, as a freezing glare appeared in his eyes, he pointed at the person behind him. This was almost an instinctive action. It was an instinct he had developed after going through so many years in the world. The moment he did so, Su Ming immediately pulled back his hand and turned it into a fist before he punched the person behind him lightly on the shoulder. Lei Chun. That punch was a meeting between brothers, a meeting that reflected longing. The person who punched Su Ming was Lei Chun. He laughed out loud and let Su Ming's fist land on his body with a smug look on his face. "I'll be fine even if you hit me a few more times with your punches. What are you doing here? Why are you daydreaming? My mother asked me to call you over for dinner." Su Ming looked at Lei Chun and a smile appeared on his face. He went forward and hugged Lei Chun tightly. This was different from hugging the elder. This was a form of friendship between brothers. "What's wrong? Why are you acting so strangely today?" Lei Chun was momentarily stunned. He allowed Su Ming to hug him. After a moment, when Su Ming looked at him again, Lei Chun saw the ancient look in Su Ming's eyes. Lei Chun scratched his head and looked at Su Ming, puzzled. He even lifted his hand to touch Su Ming's forehead. Something's wrong. Could he be sick? As Lei Chun mumbled, he lifted his hand. Just as he was about to touch the center of Su Ming's brows, he suddenly stopped and looked at Su Ming carefully. "Something's really wrong. You didn't dodge. You're the one who's sick." Su Ming laughed bitterly and said, "That's right. That's normal." Lei Chun grinned and patted Su Ming's shoulder, then punched his own chest. "Su Ming, I'm already a berserker. Don't worry. What I told you before is true. If anyone dares to bully you, I'll beat them up. Once I become the tribe leader, I'll protect you. We'll drink every day and eat meat every day. Let Bei Ling go hunting every day and let Chun Xing. Never mind. She'll be by your side." Lei Chun smiled and walked in front of Su Ming, bringing him back to his tent. "The third chapter is here. We're a little closer. There's still a fourth chapter left. I'm writing it now. Please continue working hard. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian. Come and vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation." Chapter 647. The sun set in the west and gradually disappeared. The golden dusk slowly disappeared as well. As the sky darkened, the stars in the sky formed the outline of the starry sky in Su Ming's memories. The brilliant moon also made those who looked at it feel homesick. Yet Su Ming did not know how a person who was in his hometown could feel homesick. He only knew that on the first night he returned to Dark Mountain, he still missed this place as he looked at the moon. He saw the elder, he saw Lei Chun, he saw all the people in his memories, and Su Ming's heart gradually calmed down. Every single blade of grass and tree in this place was incredibly familiar to him. Everything here was buried in his heart, and he would never forget it. Bei Ling was still cold towards him, but Chun Xian was still slightly concerned about him. The house that belonged to Su Ming was clean and spotless. It was Chun Xian's silent care. Perhaps it was love, or perhaps it had nothing to do with love. Chun Xian might have liked Su Ming before, but perhaps she liked Bei Ling even more. Wu La's disdain. This girl, who was not particularly beautiful, fell into his arms and mumbled Mo Su's name in his memories. Her beauty surpassed everything else, and it was branded deeply into Su Ming's heart, causing him to be unable to forget it. When he saw her again, there was only warmth in Su Ming's heart. There was nothing else. Lei Chen's hearty laughter and the oath he swore made Su Ming feel the warmth between brothers. He did not want to believe that all of this was fake. The elder's kindness and warm embrace also made Su Ming believe that he had a dream the previous night. It was a cruel dream that had nothing to do with romance, but was filled with blood and time. Now, perhaps he had woken up from his dream. Su Ming sat outside his house and lifted his head to look at the moon in the sky. The dinner he had at Lei Chen's house made him remember many things. There were only a few lights in the tribe at night. It was quiet all around. There was no wind. Yet there was a mournful song of the sun echoing in the night. It was a song played by the people in the tribe. Su Ming could not forget this song. Perhaps it's not 3 days. Perhaps yesterday was a dream. Perhaps I can stay in Dark Mountain forever, Su Ming mumbled. Su Ming mumbled. Lei Chen was not with him. At night, he was scolded by his mother again and was forced to stay at home. He had to pretend to be asleep. Su Ming looked at the moon in the sky quietly and listened to the song of the sun. It was as if he was dreaming and did not know he was a guest. All of a sudden, he wanted to take a look at Witty, who might not know him yet. When he thought of Bai Ling, Su Ming felt a stab of pain in his heart. The promise he had lost was gone forever. When he turned his head back, he could only hear sighs, but he could no longer see each other. Su Ming stood up and walked towards the tribe's gate. Yet the moment he reached the gate and was about to leave, his footsteps faltered because a person walked towards him from the darkness. "Who are you?" An eerie voice came from the figure as he gradually walked out of the shadows and into the moonlight. He was Shan Hen. A cold and dark look appeared in his eyes as he stared at Su Ming. When he spoke, faint ripples of his cultivation base could be seen on his right hand, as if he was about to form a blade. "You're not Su Ming. You can deceive others, but you can't deceive me. Every single time Su Ming looks at me, his gaze is different from yours," Shan Hen said in a low voice as he stared at Su Ming. Su Ming looked at Shan Hen quietly. In his memories, this was a senior of his tribe that he had killed with his own hands. "I am Su Ming," Su Ming said softly and walked forward. Su Ming spoke softly and walked forward. Shan Hen's expression changed, and he lifted his right hand swiftly, but the moment he did so, Su Ming walked past him with light footsteps. Shan Hen's entire body shuddered, and he found himself unable to lower his lifted right hand. During that instant, when Su Ming walked past him at a speed that surpassed what his eyes could see, he had felt a powerful wave of power that suffocated him. That ripple was very faint and only spread out 5 feet. Only he could feel it. The strength of that aura surpassed all the berserkers he had seen before, and it even surpassed those in the transcendence realm. He had a strong feeling that with just one thought, this person could destroy him, this tribe, and this entire land. In the midst of his shock, Shan Hen's entire body was drenched in sweat. After a long while, he slowly turned his head around, but he could no longer see Su Ming. Su Ming walked on the path in the forest. His footsteps were not quick as he walked towards Bai Ling's tribe in the middle of the night. As he walked, Su Ming stopped. He hesitated for a moment, then looked at Dark Mountain in the dark. Suddenly, he lifted his right hand, placed it by his lips, and let out a sharp whistle. The whistle reverberated in the air and gradually disappeared into the night. Su Ming waited quietly. An hour later, a fiery red figure suddenly charged towards him from the forest in the distance. Along with the appearance of that figure were joyful cries. That fiery red figure was Xiao Hong. It charged forward and soon appeared before Su Ming. With an excited look on its face, it danced around Su Ming a few times before sitting down on his shoulder and grabbing Su Ming's hair with its claws, fiddling with it non-stop. "Xiao Hong." Su Ming looked at the little monkey on his shoulder and simply let it play with his hair. He lifted his hand and stroked its body gently. A sentimental and complicated smile appeared on his face. "We meet again," Xiao Hong hissed a few times, looking as if they had indeed met again. It glared at Su Ming and gestured at him for a long time, expressing its anger. It was as if it was complaining that Su Ming had not appeared for a long time. In the end, Xiao Hong gestured with 3 fingers. Su Ming knew that it meant 3 days, or perhaps 3 months. It could also mean 3 years, 30 years, or even longer. Only Xiao Hong would know the specifics. As he stroked Xiao Hong's fur, Su Ming turned into a long arc and charged towards Bai Ling's tribe. Before long, Dark Dragon Tribe's gigantic fence appeared before him. There were also long spears erected on the fence. Those were the tribe's guards. Su Ming looked at Dark Dragon Tribe and walked towards it. No one noticed his arrival until he reached the tribe. When he spread his divine sense outwards, he found the figure that made his heart ache in his memories. It was Bai Ling's house. Bai Ling had already fallen asleep in the dark. There was a peaceful look on her beautiful face. It was a little different compared to the wild look on her face when she opened her eyes. Su Ming stood by Bai Ling's bed quietly and looked at the beautiful girl. He looked at the smile on her lips as she slept. He did not know what kind of beautiful thing she was dreaming about. Su Ming's heart ached. The scenes in his memories appeared between him and Bai Ling. Their meeting under the blood moon, their running around in circles in the snowy night, their whispers as they told each other their stories, and the final moment when their hair turned white amidst the snowflakes, until the promise Su Ming could not keep. All of these turned into a wave of sadness that filled Su Ming's heart. He looked at Bai Ling with a dumbfounded expression. He looked at the girl who had been branded deeply in his heart. She was his first love. Ling Er, I'm back, Su Ming mumbled softly. There was a gentle look in his eyes. He lifted his hand, wanting to touch Bai Ling's face gently. His actions were gentle, but the moment his hand was about to touch Bai Ling's face, Bai Ling opened her eyes. She looked at Su Ming quietly. The wildness in her eyes was a sight that Su Ming would never forget. Su Ming's hand froze for a moment, but it was only for a moment before he touched Bai Ling's face without any hesitation. Her face was a little cold and very soft, causing the gentleness in Su Ming's eyes to become even stronger. Bai Ling did not dodge. Instead, she widened her eyes and looked at Su Ming, completely stunned. When Su Ming lifted his hand, the gentleness in his eyes remained. He looked at Bai Ling deeply, then stood up, turned his head around, and was about to leave. Who are you? Bai Ling's terrified and weak voice came from behind him. Su Ming. Su Ming walked towards the door of the house. At the instant he touched Bai Ling, the cold look on her face made him understand many things in anguish. This place was not real. This was fake. This was the serendipity the old Sun Maker had mentioned. This was an illusory world created with Su Ming's memories as the center. This was a void world, because in this hot season, the cold look on Bai Ling's face was the last thing Su Ming felt when he was in the snow. All of this was an illusion. This serendipity that lasted for 3 days was for Su Ming to understand the existence of fate in the world of his memories. You can choose not to believe it. You can think that the dark mountain in your memories is fake. As long as you attack and kill all the people you are familiar with here, the Elder, Lei Chun, Bai Ling, Wu La, Chen Exan, Bai Ling, and all the others, as long as you attack, you will naturally be able to see the expressions on everyone's faces after they're killed by you. At that time, you will be able to tell whether all of this is real or fake. At that time, you will also be able to reverse Dark Mountain and completely forget about it. From then on, you will no longer be connected to it, and it will no longer affect your emotions. It does not matter whether there will be people who will use Dark Mountain as a trap to do anything in the future. As long as you choose to attack, then everything will disappear. It will be as if everything has truly awakened. You will shatter this world that you do not believe in, and the people behind it who are manipulating your fate. If you believe in it, then you will have the determination to bear the series of difficulties, the series of grief, and the parting that will appear because of Dark Mountain in the future. No matter what choice he made, this would be a short period of completion. During this completion, Su Ming would be able to take half a step towards the end of the Bone's sacrifice realm and step into the Berserker Soul Realm. Because this completion could turn into determination, Su Ming would not be lost when he stepped into the Berserker Soul Realm, which would increase his chances of success. Why do I feel that you're so familiar? Bai Ling's voice traveled into Su Ming's ears. She sat up behind him and stared at him blankly. Don't go, she whispered softly and got off the bed. She leaned against Su Ming's back gently. Starlight shone through the tent and shone on the ground indistinctly, fusing with the moonlight. Su Ming could not tell the difference between the stars and the moon, could not tell whether he had woken up from a dream, could not tell what was brilliant, what was sad, and what he missed. He could not tell whether it was a man or a woman, or whether it was a woman who was crying. Even if he had a fleeting moment with the moon and the moon, he would not be able to bring away the companionship of this life after he had woken up from a dream. This attachment was getting further and further away. It would be better if he did not see her. There are no fights in these 4 chapters, but writing them is much more tiring than fighting. Tomorrow, I'll continue breaking out. I'll see whether I can write 5 chapters tomorrow. Monthly votes. To be continued. If you like this work, please come and vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 648. I only want to be first. Up until now, I have never fought for first place. This October will be the first time I will fight with all my might. I admit that I am not prepared, because at the beginning of the month, I did not have the determination to fight for first place. I also know that every time I fight for first place, the one who is the most tired is not the author, but the readers. But at this moment, we have already killed our way here. We cannot retreat. Since we're going to fight, then we will fight to the death. Cast your monthly votes until we run out of ammunition and food this month. It is rare to be crazy in life. This month, you guys accompany me to be crazy, okay? Next month, you guys rest. Today, when I said continuous outbursts, I said 3 days, but there are obviously more than 3 days until the end of the month. If there is a first continuous outburst, there will be a second one. When I said this, I hesitated for a moment, but I asked myself a question. Ear root, will you die of exhaustion if you continue outbursting? No. Monthly votes. Please give me all the monthly votes you have. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 649. Su Ming should have left. Even if he did not leave, he should have cherished the serendipity the old Sun Maker had given him, because the serendipity during these 3 days could help him fight against the great disaster he was about to face. He had to destroy this beautiful illusion and kill all the people who might have been made up, including his family, friends, love, friendship, and everything else. He had to have the determination to give up everything to become stronger and fight back. He had to have the callousness of a powerful berserker. Once he destroyed everything, he would rebuild everything. This was the true meaning behind the 3 days of serendipity. It was also what the old Sun Maker hoped Su Ming would be able to do. It was as if he had erupted in silence. It was as if he had cut off all his thoughts and memories. He would no longer care about the past and the future. He would rebuild everything to replace his memories. And with callousness and mercilessness, he would complete an incredibly important metamorphosis. This metamorphosis would allow him to attain great completion in the bone sacrifice realm and become a powerful berserker in the Berserker Soul realm. This was the serendipity. As Su Ming came to understand all of this, his understanding gradually became clear. He had guessed that the old Sun Maker had helped him. He also had a vague feeling that if he followed the old man's method and rebuilt his life after he destroyed everything, then it would be the same as him controlling his own fate. At the instant he rebuilt his life, his soul would be affected due to the completion of his heart, due to the completion of his soul. The moment he rebuilt his life, he would be able to build his statue of the god of berserkers. It also meant that when he walked out of this place, he would no longer be a berserker in the bone sacrifice realm. He would become a powerful berserker in the berserker soul realm with this strange power and the serendipity that the old Sun Maker had perhaps paid a huge price for. From then on, he would be able to face the great disaster of his life. The old Sun Maker had paved a path for him. Su Ming might not know who he was, but he could feel that the old man bore him no ill will, this serendipity, this great gift. But Su Ming could not accept it, because the price for this was the destruction of everything. Could Su Ming kill Bai Ling, who had her arms wrapped around his back? Could he end the sleeping elder's life in his sleep? Could he kill Chen Xian just because he had attained completion? Could he kill Lei Chun, kill his parents, and destroy everything in Dark Mountain Tribe? I can't. Su Ming laughed brokenly. He could feel Bai Ling's warmth behind him. He could not do it. Time trickled by. Su Ming stood there with Bai Ling hugging him from behind. The sky was no longer dark, but was slowly becoming brighter. On that night, the two of them just stood there like that. They did not speak to each other. Bai Ling buried her head in Su Ming's back, and for some unknown reason, the feeling of his heartbeat made her cry tears of love. Perhaps those tears were from longing, but they could not be brushed away. They stained Su Ming's robes. When morning arrived, Su Ming chose to leave. Bai Ling lay quietly on her bed as if she had fallen asleep. However, the tears in her eyes were still there. They fell onto the pillow and disappeared. That teardrop contained so many memories, thoughts, and sighs. Perhaps even Bai Ling herself couldn't count them all. Su Ming walked out of Dark Dragon Tribe under the rays of the morning sun. He walked quietly in the forest and looked at the rays of sunlight shining through the forest and the falling leaves. Xiao Hong, who was sitting on his shoulder, seemed to have sensed Su Ming's complicated feelings and remained silent along the way. This was the first day. There were only 2 days left for Su Ming to make his choice. He had originally intended to go to Windstream Tribe, but he no longer had that thought. He looked at Dark Mountain under the sun and did not have the thought of going to the ruins of the Fire Berserker Tribe. Exhaustion filled his heart. He chose to go home, back to Dark Mountain Tribe, back to his home. It was morning in Dark Mountain Tribe. It was as if all living things had come alive. The tribe members were doing their own things under the smoke from chimneys. The children seemed to never know fatigue. They looked forward to the arrival of the day and playing with their friends. When Su Ming returned, he looked at the familiar tribe. He sat quietly outside his tent and looked at the blue sky and white clouds. He looked at the colorful sunlight. He looked at the tribe and remembered everything that was in his memories. He wanted to remember all of this deeply once again. It was as if there was a blade cutting through this picture scroll and carving it deep into his heart and soul. Could it be that only by destroying these things can I control my own fate? Su Ming whispered to himself. Perhaps this sort of destruction can indeed allow a person to control their own fate, because a callous heart can't contain even a hint of warmth. If there's no warmth, then no matter what other people do, they won't be able to find a place to live. But Su Ming looked at the children running around on the empty ground before him and closed his eyes. Are they also fake? The sky gradually darkened. Dusk was gone and moonlight shone on the ground. Su Ming continued sitting in his tent and looked at everything in the tribe. He no longer thought about it, but quietly watched the sun rise and set. He knew that when the sun rose once again, it would be the last day he could remember in Dark Mountain. Perhaps he did not know when he would be able to see it again. Perhaps he would never see it again. Su Ming closed his eyes. The song played by the people in the tribe echoed in his ears, and the night passed by. When the morning of the second day arrived, the sky was no longer clear. Instead, there were dark clouds and it started drizzling. However, on this last day, Su Ming did not think about anything. He smiled and chatted with the elder, then happily helped Grandpa Nan's Song tidy up the pharmacy. He even played with the children like a child and told them stories. Occasionally, his silver bell-like giggles would ring in the air, and they would become the most pleasing sound in the tribe. He laughed and played around with Lei Chun, just like how he had been when he was ignorant of the world around him. In fact, he did not even think about it. He had his own friends, his own family, and he was happy and carefree. Wu La might be scornful towards Su Ming, but Su Ming still had a smile on his face. He did not utter a single word of complaint and took the initiative to help Wu La with her tasks. His smile stunned Wu La, and the cold expression on her face slowly relaxed. As for Bei Ling, Su Ming did not seem to know fatigue. He used his last day to be very courteous. When he thought about how he had helped him when he was young and how he had taught him the arrow, even the usually aloof Bei Ling nodded towards Su Ming with a complicated expression after a moment of silence. The two of them started shooting arrows just like they had done many years ago. As for Chun Exant, she sat happily by the side and looked at the two men who had entered her heart. Occasionally, she would go up and hand them water as her laughter echoed in the air. On this day, all the people in the tribe could feel that there was something different about Su Ming. On this day, he was busy from morning until dusk, and when night fell, no one could see the reluctance to part behind his smile. There was always a smile on his face, but as night fell and moonlight shone on the ground, no one could see the reluctance to part behind his smile. When the sky darkened, Su Ming's smile turned into anguish. He looked at the lights around the tribe, gradually being extinguished, and watched everything turn from bustling to quiet. His heart clenched in pain. "Am I going to leave?" he mumbled. He knew that when the sun rose once again, he would disappear from this beautiful world. The anguish on his face gradually turned into a smile. He needed to smile. He wanted to smile. Even if he had to leave, he was already content to have these 3 days. As he smiled, Su Ming did not look at the moonlight, did not look at the darkness around him, and neither did he look at the tribe. Instead, he lifted the tent's flap and walked in. He lay down on a small bed and looked at the familiar surroundings around him. With a smile on his face, he slowly closed his eyes. "Sleep. Perhaps when I wake up, I will still be here," Su Ming mumbled softly. In the end, he did not choose the path the old Sunmaker had pointed out to him. Even if he could reach the Berserker Soul Realm, if he continued down this path, even if he could gain the right to fight against the great disaster that was about to arrive, even so, he still chose his own path. All of this might not be true or false. The moon in the water was still a moon. This flower was still a flower. Destruction could create a new life, but if he could preserve everything and keep it in the depths of his memories so that it would become the most precious thing in his life, then his heart would not turn cold, his love would not die, and he might be able to create a new life. My fate is mine. I will choose it myself. If I say it's true, then it will truly exist in my heart. Su Ming closed his eyes and slowly fell asleep. Farewell, my Wu Shan. Goodbye, my family, my friend, my love, all of my childhood. All of you will forever be in my heart. In the deepest parts of my heart, you will become my warmth. Goodbye. This was a feeling of deep sleep that he had never felt ever since he left Dark Mountain. Not even when he was on the 9th summit. That feeling was something that was in his memories. At the moment he fell asleep, Su Ming could not hear a sigh echoing in the air. There was a feeling within that sigh that could confuse others, and he could not tell what it was. The world was gradually enveloped by fog, and the world gradually turned into nothingness. When Su Ming opened his eyes once again, the first thing he heard was the sound of the sea. He smelled the stench of blood in the sea, and he saw the lonely island. There was no dark mountain around him, no tribe, and not a single person. The only thing there was the bald crane lying on the island with its eyes open. Su Ming stood on the island for a long, long time, until he closed his eyes once again before opening them slowly. I've woken up from my dream. The things that had happened during those 3 days still appeared before Su Ming's eyes. A wave of sadness would fuse into his temperament from then on. This was the sadness of his soul, the pain of homesickness. This was the bitterness that could not be blown away by the wind. This was the beauty he had chosen. With a soft sigh, Su Ming wrapped his fist in his palm and bowed deeply towards the island beneath his feet. He was bowing towards the old Sun Maker, thanking him for the serendipity he had received during those 3 days. Once he bowed, Su Ming lifted his head and took a step forward. With the bald crane in his hand, he turned into a long arc and charged into the sky. The island slowly disappeared behind him. Only the mournful song of the sun remained, moaning and echoing in the air, as if it was sending Su Ming off until he left into the distance. First update. Throw your monthly votes at me. You won't die from exhaustion. To be continued. If you like this work, please come Chidian. Come to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 650. Almost at the instant Su Ming flew out of the island, a ghost face suddenly appeared on the surface of the Dead Sea. That ghost face was a corpse hidden under the sea. That corpse had no head, and the ghost face was formed from its bare chest. At the same time, there were more than a dozen corpses with ghost faces on the edge of eastern wastelands on the Dead Sea. The ghost faces on their bodies shone with a dark light at the same time, and shrill screams that no one could hear reverberated in the air. Soon after, Ditan, who was meditating at the edge of eastern wastelands, opened his eyes, and a freezing glare shone in them. A cold sneer appeared at the corners of his lips. "You finally appear, my child." He stood up slowly and was just about to take a step towards the sky when he suddenly frowned. After a moment of pensive silence, he sat down once again. That person hid Destiny's presence completely, causing me to not be able to detect it previously. If it was done by someone, then that person's level of cultivation is definitely not to be trifled with. South morning, Ditan's eyes sparkled, and a cold sneer appeared on his lips. At that moment, Su Ming was charging forward in the sky. His face was calm, but the sadness in his soul could not be hidden. It surrounded his body, causing others to be unable to get close to him, or else they would be lost in his world and be tainted by his sadness. Great disaster. In the land of berserkers in Death Void, the only one who can be considered a great disaster to me is Ditan. Su Ming's pupils shrank, but killing intent shone within them. Judging by the time, it should be about time for Ditan's clone to descend. There's a high possibility that this great disaster came from Ditan. Killing intent shone in Su Ming's eyes, and an overflowing fighting spirit rose in his heart. Ditan was a great disaster to him, but similarly, Su Ming also had the belief that he had to kill Ditan. If Ditan did not die, it would be difficult for Su Ming to control himself. This sort of great enemy was the motivation that spurred him on. Only by killing Ditan's clone would he be able to control his own fate in the land of berserkers. Ditan's real self might be incredibly powerful, but he's only sent his clone here over the years. Perhaps it's because his real self can't descend personally. But this is just a guess. If I'm also facing his clone this time, then it means that there's a high possibility that my guess is true. If it's really his clone, then I might be able to fight him. Su Ming lowered his head and looked at his right index finger. There was still a small circle of the first god of berserker's hair on that finger. If I could kill Ditan's first clone in the past, then I can also kill his second clone. In the past, I could not tell just how strong Ditan was, and neither could I tell Hong Luo's level of cultivation. I only knew that they had already surpassed the berserker soul realm. But now, Hong Luo's cultivation base was clearly at life. He didn't know that he of life, but of weakness. He did not know that he was life. He just life. He might have life, but life of life. Perhaps he was realm, but perhaps of life of realm. But he reached stage of Ming. He realm. As for Ditan's clone, he was able to kill Hong Luo back then. His cultivation has obviously surpassed the Fate Matrix realm, but he shouldn't have reached the Fate Palace realm. The Fate Palace realm allows one to comprehend all the changes in the world, understand the regret of the heavens, and understand the power of loss. If he had reached the Fate Palace realm, then he wouldn't have been injured when he killed Hong Luo. I'm certain that his clone was at Life Privation realm in the past. Life Matrix, Life Privation, Life Palace, World of Life. I've already reached the edge of understanding the 4 great realms of life cultivation, but I haven't reached stage of Berserker's soul yet. That's why I only have his presence and can't truly step into the path of life cultivation. But it's not as if I'm completely useless when I fight against his clone. Su Ming charged through the sky and sea at an incredibly fast speed. His eyes sparkled, and a contemplative light appeared in them. All of this is just my guess. If Dtion's real self came here this time, then I won't be able to avoid this disaster. Besides, if his clone is much stronger than the one in the past, then there won't be much suspense in this battle. Great disaster. In silence, Su Ming flew away from the indistinct borders of South Morning and arrived at the vast dead sea beyond the vast South Morning. As he charged forward, a ruthless look gradually appeared in his eyes. A glint appeared in his eyes, and he charged towards the surface of the sea. Before him was a small island. That island was not too big, but it was not too small either. By the looks of it, it was about the same size as Su Ming's fated kin's island. This island was the same as the other islands Su Ming had come across on the way. There was not a single hint of life on it. It was empty, and there was no plant life on it. It was as barren as a burial mound. As Su Ming charged forward, he landed on the small island. A glint appeared in his eyes, and once he covered the entire island with his divine sense, he arrived at the center of the island and sat down cross-legged. Since the disaster is bound to come, then I might as well choose a battlefield and wait for the disaster to come. A freezing glare shone in Su Ming's eyes. He lifted his right hand, and once he seized the air, he pushed his palm down on the ground. With it, the ground trembled, and soon after, a brilliant shade of red appeared at the spot where Su Ming's palm touched the ground. That was a red meadow. Once it appeared, it started spreading outwards rapidly. In the blink of an eye, it had already covered several hundreds of feet. Su Ming bit the tip of his tongue and coughed up a mouthful of blood on the meadow. Immediately, the red meadow started swaying in a strange manner and started spreading outwards. In the blink of an eye, it covered the entire small island, and it was still spreading outwards, covering the surface of the sea. This was the first time Su Ming had spread out the red meadow at full power so that it could absorb a sufficient amount of blood and life. As it spread into the sea, this absorption would reach its peak. The ground of the entire island had already turned completely red. When Su Ming lifted his right hand, a black flagpole appeared in his hand. It had been a long time since he used this item. It was one of the treasures he had obtained in Han Mountain City, and it was a divine ability belonging to Han Mountain's ancestor. Su Ming did not know the details, but he could easily cast it. He could make it explode. This was the first counterattack Su Ming prepared for his great enemy, who was about to arrive. He placed a flagpole by the side and patted his storage bag. Immediately, a gigantic stone monument flew out from within. That stone monument was the legacy left behind by the first god of berserkers. This item could no longer allow the berserkers to obtain the legacy, but its existence could serve as a form of intimidation that could intimidate all the immortals. If Dtion really came to this place and saw this stone monument, he would definitely be shocked. This was the second counterattack he prepared for Dtion. When he erected the stone monument on the island, a glint appeared in Su Ming's eyes. He lifted his right hand and patted his storage bag. Immediately, a transparent mountain rock flew out. Within that mountain rock was the small black humanoid that had lost a finger. The small humanoid had its eyes closed, as if it was in deep sleep. Su Ming looked at the small black humanoid and asked flatly, "I have a deal. Will you do it?" The small black humanoid did not move, but after several breaths, it opened its eyes and stared at Su Ming. A strange light shone in its eyes. "What deal?" Its voice was a little piercing to the ears. "Use your full strength to help me kill a person. It doesn't matter if I live or die in the end. I will still set you free." The small black humanoid remained silent for a moment before it suddenly spoke. "How can I trust you? You have my seal on you. It's up to you whether you want to believe me. This is the only time we'll make this deal. If we don't do it, then we'll never do it again," Su Ming stated calmly. The small black humanoid struggled for a moment, and a hint of madness flashed briefly in its eyes before it nodded towards Su Ming. Su Ming lifted his right hand swiftly and slapped the transparent mountain rock. With it, the seal he placed on the mountain rock immediately disappeared, but at the same time, Su Ming's divine sense gathered on the small black humanoid. When it swept past him, the small black humanoid flew out from the transparent mountain rock. The instant it flew out, it let out a piercing howl towards the sky and looked towards Su Ming. Su Ming's expression remained the same as he looked at the small black humanoid coldly. The small black humanoid remained silent for a moment before it wrapped its fist in its palm towards Su Ming. I believe what you said, and I don't want to be your enemy. Our goal is the same, and we will both choose to leave Deathland. As he spoke, his body swayed, and his body disappeared into nothingness. He was nowhere to be seen. If Su Ming had not left his will in the area and sealed it, it would have been difficult for him to find any clues. This was the third gift Su Ming had prepared for Tian. Tian. Su Ming lifted his right hand and swung his arm. Immediately, a palace fragment belonging to the Great Yu dynasty appeared before him. He had obtained this fragment in the frozen world. Once he brought out, he pressed his right hand against it, and the grass around him immediately covered it. Su Ming's divine sense was connected to the fragment. When he had fought against old Mo Luo on Scoursive Island, he had been incredibly tempted by Great Yu's illusion art. After that, he had researched it a little, and since he had truly gone to the Great Yu dynasty, once he cast that illusion, its might would not be weak. This was the fourth gift he had prepared for Tian. Once he finished doing all this, Su Ming fell into a moment of pensive silence before he brought out the small virescent sword. As he looked at it, a hint of reluctance to part with it appeared in his eyes, but that reluctance soon disappeared. With a solemn expression on his face, Su Ming held the sword in his right hand and lifted his left hand to gently wipe the blade of the sword. As he did this, a strange light appeared in his eyes, and some complicated words tumbled out of his mouth. His nascent divinity also spread out and gradually fused into the small sword as Su Ming wiped his finger across it. The small virescent sword shuddered and let out a piercing screech. After a moment, a piercing light spread out from the sword, and a tragic presence spread out from it. Within that presence was a reluctance to part with Su Ming, as well as a longing for him. This was the fifth gift Su Ming had prepared for Tian. With Hong Luo's unique method, he offered up the sword so that the power of the sword soul would erupt forth from it, allowing it to withstand the might of Su Ming's flick of a finger. I'm sending the second update, asking for monthly votes. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian. Come and vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. You're tuning in to the Warrior Lore YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.